the servant girl who humiliated the Alpha King in his own fortress, and lived to reshape an entire kingdom. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happens when a forgotten woman corrects the most powerful man in the realm will shock you. Drop a like if you're watching from your city, and comment where you're from. Let's begin. The tavern reeked of stale ale and desperation. Lyra Vexley moved through the crowd like smoke, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. Her hands were raw from scrubbing grease off pewter plates, her shoulders ached from carrying trays heavier than they had any right to be, and her feet screamed inside boots worn thin at the soles. She'd learned long ago that survival in Ashmar, the capital of the Northern Reach, required one critical skill: the ability to disappear while standing in plain sight. The frontier capital was a place where weakness got you killed and poverty got you forgotten. Built from stone and stubbornness at the edge of the frozen wastes, Ashmar attracted the desperate, the dangerous, and the damned. Traders who'd lost everything, soldiers who'd seen too much, women who'd run out of options. Lyra was all three, though no one bothered to ask. She was 23 and looked older. Life had a way of doing that here. "Girl!" A merchant slammed his mug on the table, foam sloshing over the rim. "More ale, and this time, don't water it down." She hadn't watered it down. The tavern keeper did that, but Lyra nodded anyway, murmuring something appropriately apologetic, and slipped back toward the bar. Arguing got you noticed. Being noticed got you hurt. The Broken Antler wasn't the worst tavern in Ashmar, but it was close. The owner, a thick-necked man named Garvin, ran it with the philosophy that customers were cattle and staff were disposable. Lyra had worked there for 3 years, ever since her mother died, and left her with nothing but debts and a room full of worthless belongings. She'd sold everything except one thing: a book. It sat hidden beneath the loose floorboard under her cot in the servants' quarters. A slim volume bound in cracked leather, written in a language no one alive was supposed to understand. Her mother had never explained where it came from or why she'd guarded it so fiercely. She'd only taught Lyra to read it, whispering the words late at night when the world was asleep and secrets felt safe. The language was called Velrathis, the tongue of ancients. It hadn't been spoken in 4 generations, not since the old kings fell and the current dynasties rose from the ashes. Possessing knowledge of it was technically illegal, considered dangerous, seditious, a link to powers that modern rulers wanted buried. Lyra had never told a soul. "Move faster, girl!" Garvin's voice cracked across the room like a whip. She moved. The tavern was busier than usual tonight. A company of soldiers had arrived that afternoon, their armor still dusted with road grime, their eyes hard and watchful. Lyra had learned to read soldiers. These men weren't regular border guards. They carried themselves differently, straighter spines, sharper gazes, the kind of discipline that came from serving someone important. She was refilling mugs at a corner table when the door slammed open. The temperature in the room dropped. Everyone felt it. Conversation stuttered and died. Laughter choked off mid-breath. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to dim, as though the flames themselves recognized a superior predator. Alpha King Kyle Draven had entered the building. Lyra froze, pitcher in hand, and watched as the most powerful man in the Northern Reach stepped into the Broken Antler like he owned it, which technically he did. He owned everything. Kyle Draven was a man built for violence. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. His hair was dark, cut short and practical, and his face was all sharp angles and hard lines, like something carved from granite by an impatient sculptor. But it was his eyes that made people nervous. Cold, gray. The kind of eyes that saw through excuses and didn't bother with mercy. He wore simple travel leathers, not the ceremonial armor most kings preferred, but the sword at his hip was unmistakable. Morketh, the Devourer. A blade that had ended rebellions and executions alike, forged from steel that supposedly drank the strength of those it killed. People believed that. Lyra wasn't sure if she did, but she wasn't about to test it. Kyle swept the room with a glance, his expression unreadable, and made his way to the largest table near the fire. His soldiers followed, moving with the synchronized efficiency of men who'd fought together, bled together, survived together. One of them, a grizzled captain with a scar bisecting his face, gestured for Garvin. The tavern keeper practically tripped over himself, rushing forward. "Your Majesty," Garvin stammered, bowing so low Lyra thought he might topple over.
We are honored, deeply honored, please. Anything you need. Kael waved him off. Allez, food. Don't make a spectacle. Of course, Garvin spun, eyes landing on Lyra. You, serve the king, and for the love of sanity, don't embarrass me. Lyra's stomach clenched. She wanted to refuse, to hand the task off to someone else, anyone else. But Garvin was already shoving her toward the kitchen, and the other servers were conveniently finding reasons to be elsewhere. Cowards, all of them. She filled a tray with mugs of ale, Garvin's best stock, the stuff he saved for bribes and emergencies, and carried it toward the king's table. Her hands were steady. Years of practice had taught her that much, but her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Don't look at him. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist. She set the mugs down one by one, keeping her eyes low, her movements efficient. The soldiers barely acknowledged her. They were too busy laughing at some shared joke, their voices loud and rough. Kael, however, watched her. She felt his gaze like a blade against her neck. What's your name? Lyra's breath caught. For a moment, she considered pretending she hadn't heard, but ignoring a direct question from the Alpha King was a good way to lose more than just her job. Lyra, Your Majesty. Lyra. He repeated it slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. You work here long? 3 years. You like it? What kind of question was that? Did anyone like working in a place like this? But Lyra knew better than to be honest. It's steady work, Your Majesty. One of the soldiers snorted. Steady work in a rat hole. Kael didn't laugh. He leaned back in his chair, still watching her, and Lyra felt the uncomfortable sensation of being studied. Not leered at. She'd dealt with that plenty, but examined like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. You read? He asked. The question hit her like cold water. A little, she lied. Kael turned to one of his men. Ronan, you still carrying that old contract? The man he addressed, Ronan Vale, Lyra realized, the king's closest advisor and rumored best friend, reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. He tossed it on the table with a smirk. Still can't make sense of half of it, Ronan said. Damn thing's written in some dead language. Kael picked up the parchment, glanced at it, then looked back at Lyra. His expression shifted, something colder, sharper. Since you're so good at serving, let's see how you do with translation. He said something then, a string of words in a language that should have been meaningless. Harsh consonants, rolling vowels, sounds that felt older than the stones beneath their feet. Velrathis. The command was simple, kneel and beg for mercy. He didn't expect her to understand. He was mocking her, using a dead tongue to make a joke at her expense. The soldiers were already grinning, waiting for her confusion, ready to laugh. But Lyra understood every word. Her mind raced. She could pretend ignorance, stammer something apologetic, play the fool, and walk away. Or she could do something incredibly stupid. She met his eyes. Your grammar is wrong, she said clearly in flawless Velrathis. The verb form you used implies I'm already kneeling. If you want to command me to kneel, the correct structure is Shalveranethka Moraval. What you said translates closer to continue begging while prone, which makes no sense in this context. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people minding their business. The suffocating silence of a world holding its breath. Kael Draven stared at her. Ronan's smirk vanished. Every soldier at the table froze, hands instinctively moving toward weapons. Lyra's heart tried to climb out through her throat. What had she just done? The king rose slowly, his chair scraping against the floor like a death knell. He was taller than she'd realized, and up close, his presence was overwhelming. He looked at her the way a wolf looks at something that just startled it, deciding whether to flee or attack. Say that again, he said quietly. Lyra's mouth was dry, too late to back down now. You made a grammatical error, Your Majesty, in Velrathis, the ancient tongue. I know what Velrathis is. His voice was dangerously soft. What I want to know is how a tavern servant knows it. She didn't have a good answer. The truth that her mother had taught her, that she'd spent years secretly studying a forbidden language, sounded insane. But lying to the Alpha King seemed worse. I taught myself, she said, which was partially true. From a book. A book? Kael's eyes narrowed. Velrathis hasn't been taught in generations. The texts were destroyed, burned, buried. So tell me, Lyra, where exactly did you find this book? My mother left it to me. And where did she get it? I don't know. Convenient. Ronan stepped forward, hand on his sword. She's lying, Kyle. Probably a spy, or worse. I'm not lying, Lyra said, hating how her voice shook. And I'm not a spy. I'm just... Just what? Kyle interrupted. Just a girl who happens to speak a language that's been dead for 100 years? A language that was used by the old kings to bind oaths, cast curses, control powers most people think are myths? He leaned closer, and Lyra smelled leather and smoke. Do you have any idea what you just revealed? She did. She absolutely did. And she was terrified. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Anger. She'd spent her entire life being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like she didn't matter. And now, the one time she dared to speak up, to prove she was more than just a servant girl with calloused hands and a forgettable face, she was being threatened. I revealed, she said slowly, that you don't know Velrothes as well as you think you do. The soldiers tensed. Ronan swore under his breath. Cale stared at her for a long, dangerous moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just found interesting prey. You've got spine, he said. Stupid spine, but spine nonetheless. He turned to Ronan. We're taking her. Lyra's stomach dropped. What? You heard me? Pack whatever pathetic belongings you have. You're coming to the fortress. I can't just leave. Bulls. Yes, you can. Cale's voice was iron. Consider it a royal summons. Refuse, and I'll have you arrested for possessing illegal knowledge. Accept, and maybe you'll live long enough to regret correcting me. Garvin, who'd been watching from across the room with the expression of a man watching his livelihood evaporate, hurried over. Your Majesty, please, if the girl has offended... She hasn't offended me, Kyle said. She's intrigued me, which is worse for her. He looked back at Lyra. You have 10 minutes. He walked out. His soldiers followed. And Lyra stood there, tray still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. She'd corrected the Alpha King, and now she was being dragged to his fortress. She was either about to become the most valuable person in the kingdom, or the deadest. Lyra's room in the servants' quarters was barely large enough to turn around in. A cot, a trunk, a cracked mirror, and the loose floorboard that hid her secrets. She knelt, pried up the board, and pulled out the book. It was small, bound in dark leather that had cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. The text inside was written in a careful hand, each letter of Velrothes formed with precision. Her mother had called it a grimoire, though Lyra wasn't sure if that was the right word. It contained phrases, translations, fragments of old contracts and oaths. Nothing magical, nothing dangerous. At least she'd thought so. Now holding it in her hands, she wondered if she'd been wrong. Lyra? She jumped, nearly dropping the book. One of the other servants, a girl named Mina, stood in the doorway, eyes wide. Is it true? Mina whispered. You're leaving with the king? I don't have a choice. Everyone's saying you insulted him, that you spoke in some weird language. I didn't insult him. I just... Lyra stopped. How did you explain this? I corrected him. Mina's face went pale. You're insane. Probably. What are you going to do? Lyra shoved the book into her satchel along with a spare shirt and her mother's only other possession, a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Survive. What else? Mina grabbed her arm. Lyra, listen to me. People who go to the fortress don't always come back, especially people who've angered the king. He didn't seem angry. He seemed curious. Curious is worse. You know what they say about him, right? That he's never lost a battle. That he killed his own father to take the throne. That he can smell lies. Lyra had heard the rumors. Everyone had. Cale Draven's rise to power had been brutal and swift. His father, the previous king, had been weak, indecisive, bleeding the kingdom dry through incompetence and corruption. Kyle had challenged him publicly, defeated him in single combat, and taken the crown while his father's blood was still warm on the stones. It had been 10 years since then, 10 years of iron rule, harsh justice, and a kingdom that feared its king almost as much as it respected him. I don't have a choice, Lyra repeated. If I run, he'll find me. If I stay, Garvin will throw me out for causing trouble. At least at the fortress, I might have a chance. A chance at what? Lyra didn't answer. She didn't know. She walked out of the Broken Antler for the last time, stepped into the cold night air, and found Kale's soldiers waiting. One of them, a younger man with kind eyes, gestured toward a horse. "You ride?" he asked. "Not well. Learn fast." But his tone wasn't unkind. He helped her mount, adjusted the stirrups, and handed her the reins. "Keep up. The king doesn't wait for stragglers." They rode through the streets of Ashmar, hooves clattering on cobblestones. The city at night was a different beast than during the day. Shadows pooled in alleyways where desperate people made desperate choices. Fires burned in barrels where the homeless huddled for warmth. Lyra had walked these streets countless times, but always on foot, always invisible. Now, riding with the king's soldiers, people stared. She saw recognition in their eyes. Confusion. Fear. A servant girl riding with the elite guard. It didn't make sense. It broke the natural order of things. Good, Lyra thought bitterly. Let them wonder. The fortress loomed ahead, growing larger with each stride. Draven's Keep sat on a hill overlooking the capital, a mass of black stone and iron that had stood for 3 centuries. It had been built by the first Draven king, a warlord who'd conquered the northern reach through sheer brutality and clever strategy. Every king since had added to it, more walls, more towers, more defenses. It looked less like a palace and more like a weapon. The gate opened as they approached, massive iron doors swinging inward with a groan that echoed across the courtyard. Guards in dark armor watched from the battlements, their faces hidden behind helms, their spears glinting in the torchlight. Inside the courtyard was organized chaos. Soldiers drilled in formation despite the late hour. Servants hurried between buildings carrying supplies. Somewhere, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil, the sound sharp and rhythmic. Kyle dismounted smoothly and handed his reins to a stable boy without a word. Ronan appeared at his side, speaking in low, urgent tones. Lyra caught fragments of their conversation. "Don't trust her. Not asking you to trust her. Dangerous, Kyle. You know that. Everything's dangerous. That's why we survive." Kale looked at Lyra. "Follow me." She did, sliding off the horse with less grace than she would have liked. Her legs were shaky. She hadn't ridden in years, but she forced them to move. The young soldier who'd helped her earlier gave her an encouraging nod. They walked through corridors lit by torches mounted in iron brackets. The walls were stone, thick and cold, built to withstand sieges. Tapestries hung at intervals, depicting battles and victories, all of them soaked in imagery of conquest. Lyra recognized some of the scenes from stories her mother had told her. The Battle of Frozen Pass, the Siege of Thornwatch, the burning of Kale's crown. That last one made her pause. It showed a younger Kyle, barely more than a boy, standing over a burning crown while his father's body lay at his feet. The image was brutal, unflinching, and deeply uncomfortable. "Keep moving," Ronan said from behind her. His voice held an edge that made it clear he didn't appreciate her curiosity. They climbed a spiraled staircase, the steps worn smooth by centuries of use, and emerged into a corridor that felt different from the rest of the fortress. Quieter. Less martial. The torches here were spaced farther apart, casting long shadows that made the hallway feel longer than it was. Kyle stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, pushed it open, and gestured inside. "Your room." Lyra blinked. She'd expected a cell. Maybe a storage closet, if she was lucky. Instead, she was looking at a small but comfortable chamber with an actual bed, a real bed with a mattress and blankets, a desk with a chair, and a window overlooking the city. "This is yours," Kyle said. "For now." She stepped inside, still half convinced this was some kind of trick. The room was sparse but clean. A wash basin sat on a small table near the window. A wardrobe stood against one wall, empty but functional. The bed looked like it had been made recently, the blankets tucked in with military precision. "Tomorrow," Kyle continued, "you'll start translating. I have documents in Velrothis that no one's been able to read for decades. Treaties, contracts, records from the old kings. If you're as good as you claim, you'll prove it." "And if I'm not?" He smiled that cold, dangerous smile again. "Then I'll have wasted a trip." He turned to leave, but Lyra found herself speaking before she could stop. "Why are you doing this?" Kale paused in the doorway. "Doing what?" "Bringing me here. You could have just killed me, or arrested me. Why give me a room? A chance?" He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Curiosity. Maybe even respect.
Because you corrected me, he said, in public, in front of my men. And you were right. He stepped into the hall. No one's done that in years. I want to know if you're brave, brilliant, or just suicidal. Can I be all three?
The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. We'll find out. The door closed. Lyra stood alone in the room, heart pounding, mind racing. She walked to the window and looked out over Ashmar. From this height, the city looked almost beautiful. The lights from homes and taverns glowed like fallen stars. The streets formed a maze of shadow and illumination. Beyond the walls, the frozen waste stretched into darkness, endless and unforgiving. She'd spent her entire life in that city, working, surviving, invisible. Now she was here, in the fortress of the most powerful man in the realm, because she'd dared to speak. Lyra pulled the book from her satchel and set it on the desk. The leather cover was warm from being pressed against her body. She opened it carefully, the pages crackling softly, and ran her fingers over the Velrothi's script. Her mother had taught her this language in secret, making her promise never to reveal it. Knowledge is power, her mother had said, but power makes you a target. Stay invisible, Lyra. Stay safe. Well, she'd failed spectacularly at that. But maybe, just maybe, her mother had been wrong. Maybe being invisible wasn't the same as being safe. Maybe it was just another way of being erased. A knock on the door startled her. She shoved the book under the blankets and stood. Yes? The door opened to reveal a young woman in servant's clothing carrying a tray. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room like she expected something to jump out at her. Brought you dinner, the woman said quickly. Cook said you'd probably be hungry. Thank you. The woman set the tray on the desk. Bread, cheese, some kind of stew that smelled better than anything Lyra had eaten in months, and turned to leave. But she hesitated at the door. Is it true? She asked quietly. That you spoke to the king in the old language? Word traveled fast. Yes. And he didn't kill you? Apparently not. The woman stared at her like she was looking at a ghost. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the stupidest. I'm leaning towards stupid, a small smile. I'm Clara. I work in the kitchens. If you need anything, ask for me. Why are you being kind to me? Clara's smile faded. Because anyone who can stand up to the king and live deserves a little kindness. This place doesn't have much of it. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Lyra sat at the desk and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The stew was rich and warm, the bread fresh, the cheese sharp and satisfying. It was the kind of meal she used to dream about during long shifts at the tavern. When she finished, she pulled out the book again and began to read. Not to study, she knew most of it by heart, but to ground herself. The familiar words, the careful script, the weight of her mother's legacy. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Tests, probably. Interrogations. Maybe even danger. But for tonight, she was alive. She had a room, a bed, and a belly full of real food. It was more than she'd had in years. And somehow, that felt like a small victory. Lyra woke to the sound of bells. They rang across the fortress, deep and resonant, marking the dawn. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, before remembering where she was. The room was still dark, the sun not yet risen, but torchlight flickered through the window from the courtyard below. She dressed quickly in her spare shirt and the same worn skirt she'd worn yesterday. She had no other clothes. The thought of asking for more felt presumptuous, like she was already assuming she'd survive long enough to need them. Another knock. Clara's voice. Miss Lyra? The king wants you in the war room. War room. That sounded ominous. Lyra opened the door. Clara stood there with a bundle in her arms. Brought you these. Can't have you walking around the fortress looking like a tavern girl. The bundle turned out to be clothes. A simple dress in dark gray, sturdy boots that actually fit, and a wool cloak. Nothing fancy, but clean and well made. I can't. Yes, you can. King's orders. Now hurry. He doesn't like to be kept waiting. Lyra changed quickly, marveling at how different she felt in clothes that weren't falling apart. The dress fit well enough, the boots were a revelation after years of worn-through soles, and the cloak was warm and heavy. Clara led her through the fortress, down corridors that twisted and turned in ways that made Lyra's head spin. They passed training yards where soldiers sparred with brutal efficiency, past kitchens where servants prepared breakfast for hundreds, past rooms filled with maps and weapons and the machinery of war. Finally, they stopped in front of a large door guarded by two soldiers. Clara nodded to them, and they stepped aside. Good luck, Clara whispered. Lyra stepped inside. The war room was exactly what it sounded like. A massive table dominated the center, covered in maps and documents and markers representing troops and territories. Weapons lined the walls, swords, axes, spears, all of them well maintained and ready for use. A fireplace burned at one end, casting flickering shadows across the stone floor. Kyle stood at the table, studying a map. Ronan was beside him, along with several other men Lyra didn't recognize. They all looked up when she entered.
Good, Kyle said. You're here. Come. Lyra approached the table. Up close, she could see that the map showed the northern reach and its surrounding territories. Markers indicated cities, fortresses, borders. Red markers clustered along the eastern edge. We have a problem, Kale said without preamble. 3 months ago, we signed a treaty with the Eastern Lords. It was supposed to guarantee peace for 5 years. Trade routes, military cooperation, the works. He gestured to a stack of parchments. These are the documents. They're written in Velrathis because the Eastern Lords insisted on using the old language for binding contracts. They claimed it made the agreement more legitimate, more sacred. And you agreed? I had a translator at the time, an old scholar who claimed to know the language. Kale's expression darkened. He died 2 weeks ago. Natural causes, supposedly. But before he died, he told me something interesting. He picked up one of the documents and held it out to Lyra. He said there was something wrong with the treaty, a clause that didn't make sense. He was working on translating it fully when his heart gave out. Lyra took the document carefully. The parchment was thick, expensive, covered in neat lines of Velrathis script. She scanned the first few lines. This is a standard treaty opening, she said. Declarations of intent, acknowledgement of parties, the usual formalities. Keep reading. She did. The treaty was long, dense with legal language and ceremonial phrasing. But as she worked through it, she began to notice something odd. Certain phrases repeated more often than they should. Certain words were used in unusual contexts. And then she found it. A clause buried in the middle of the document, disguised as a trade agreement. But when she read it carefully, translating each word with precision, the true meaning became clear. Her blood went cold. This isn't a peace treaty, she said slowly. Hale's eyes sharpened. Explain. This clause here, she pointed to the section. It looks like it's granting the Eastern Lords access to northern trade routes, but the wording is specific, very specific. In Velrathis, the phrase Corval Nethran doesn't just mean trade access. In the old language, it means right of passage for armed forces. Silence. You're saying, Ronan started. I'm saying this treaty gives the Eastern Lords permission to move their armies through our territory, legally, without it being considered an act of war. Lyra's voice shook slightly. You didn't sign a peace treaty. You signed an invasion agreement. The room exploded. Soldiers cursed. Ronan grabbed the document from her hands, studying it frantically. One of the other advisors started shouting about betrayal, about war, about how they'd been played. Kale said nothing. He stood perfectly still, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on Lyra. Are you certain? He asked quietly. Yes. There's no other interpretation? Not in Velrathis. The language is too precise. That's why the old kings used it, because it couldn't be misinterpreted or twisted. Every word has one meaning. She met his gaze. Your translator either didn't know the language as well as he claimed, or he lied to you. He's dead. Convenient. Very. Kale picked up the document, read the clause himself, then set it down with controlled care. Ronan, send scouts to the eastern border. I want to know if there's any unusual military movement. Already on it. And get me every document we have in Velrathis, every contract, every treaty, every scrap of parchment. I want them all translated. He looked at Lyra. By her. Lyra's heart hammered. Your Majesty, I'm not a trained diplomat. I can translate the words, but understanding the political implications are my problem. Your job is to tell me what the words actually mean. Can you do that? Yes. Then get started. He walked out, Ronan and the other advisors following. Within seconds, the war room emptied, leaving Lyra alone with a table full of documents and the sinking realization that she'd just uncovered a conspiracy that could start a war. She pulled out a chair, sat down, and reached for the first document. Her hands were shaking, but she started translating anyway, because what else could she do? She'd already jumped off the cliff.
Now she just had to hope she could fly. For 3 days, Lyra lived in a world made of ink and suspicion. The documents arrived in waves, scrolls, bound volumes, loose parchments that crumbled at the edges when she touched them, all of them written in Velrathis, all of them potentially hiding the same kind of poison she'd found in the treaty. She worked in a small room adjacent to the war chamber, a space that had probably been a storage closet before someone shoved a desk and chair inside. A single window let in gray morning light, and a brazier in the corner did a poor job of fighting off the cold. Clara brought her meals, bread, cheese, occasionally something warm, and Lyra ate without tasting, her eyes fixed on the script in front of her. The first document she'd translated after the treaty had been a trade agreement from 6 years ago. Clean. No hidden clauses, no linguistic traps, just a straightforward exchange of goods and tariffs. The second had been a border agreement, also clean. The third had made her stomach drop. Another clause, another carefully disguised piece of treachery. This one granted the Eastern Lords mineral rights to a mountain range on the kingdom's border, except the Velrathis phrasing actually transferred ownership of the land itself. Not the right to mine, the right to claim. Kael had taken that document without a word, his face carved from stone, and walked out. Now on the fourth day, Lyra was starting to see the pattern. Someone had been systematically undermining the kingdom through language, using the precision of Velrathis against itself, twisting meanings just enough that a non-expert would miss it. And whoever had done it had been patient. These documents spanned years. Different treaties, different agreements, all of them salted with traps that wouldn't spring until the Eastern Lords decided to pull the trigger. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. And it meant someone close to the king had been involved. The door opened. Lyra looked up, expecting Clara with lunch. Instead, Ronan Vale stood in the doorway. He didn't look happy. "Working hard?" he asked. His tone suggested he didn't actually care about the answer. "Yes?" "Find anything interesting?" Lyra hesitated. She'd been reporting directly to Kael, not to his advisors. But Ronan was the king's closest friend. Surely he had a right to know. 3 more compromised documents, she said carefully. 2 land agreements and a military pact. All of them contain clauses that favor the Eastern Lords in ways that weren't obvious in translation. Ronan stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The space suddenly felt much smaller. "You're saying our previous translator was incompetent? Or corrupted? He was a good man, served the king for 20 years. Then maybe he made mistakes. Velrathis is complicated, easy to misread if you're not what? Not as brilliant as you?" Ronan's voice had an edge now. "You show up out of nowhere, a tavern girl with a convenient skill set, and suddenly you're the expert? You're discovering conspiracies that a trained scholar missed?" Lyra stood slowly. "I'm telling you what the documents say. If you don't believe me, find someone else who reads Velrathis and have them verify." "There is no one else. That's the problem." Ronan crossed his arms. "You're the only living person in this kingdom who claims to read that language, which means we have to trust you. And trust is a dangerous thing to give a stranger." "I'm not asking for trust. I'm just translating words. Words that could start a war. Words that reveal a war already being waged. Just slowly, quietly." Lyra met his eyes. "If you think I'm lying, test me. Give me a document you know the meaning of. See if I translate it correctly." Ronan stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. "This was my commission papers, written in Velrathis when I became the king's advisor. The old translator told me what it said. Let's see if you agree." He handed it over. Lyra unfolded it carefully. The script was formal, ceremonial. She read through it once, then again to be sure. "It's an oath of service," she said. "Standard structure. You pledge loyalty to the crown, agree to serve in matters of war and peace, accept the responsibilities of your position." She paused. "There's a section here about consequences for betrayal, pretty harsh ones. What does it say exactly? Should the sworn betray the crown through action or omission, let the weight of ancestors fall upon him, and let his name be erased from memory, and let his bloodline carry the stain." Lyra looked up. Dramatic, but that's how the old kings wrote. They liked their curses. Ronan's expression didn't change. "That's what the old translator said." "Then I'm consistent, at least." He took the parchment back, refolded it, and tucked it away. For a moment, he seemed to be weighing something. Then he said quietly, "The king trusts you. I don't know why, but he does. And Kael doesn't trust easily.
Maybe he just trusts the language, not me. Maybe. Ronan moved toward the door, then stopped. A word of advice, tavern girl. This court eats people like you for breakfast. You're smart, I'll give you that. But smart doesn't keep you alive here. Knowing when to shut up does. He left. Lyra sat back down, heart pounding harder than it should. That had felt less like a warning and more like a threat. Or maybe she was just being paranoid. 3 days of translating conspiracy documents would do that to a person. She picked up the next parchment and tried to focus. The words blurred. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and tried again. Still blurred. When had she last slept? Really slept, not just collapsed at the desk for a few hours before jerking awake from dreams of burning documents and dead translators. A knock, softer this time. Come in. Clara entered carrying a tray, but her expression was tense. You need to eat. Not hungry. Don't care. Eat anyway. Clara set the tray down with more force than necessary. You look like death. When did you last see sunlight? What day is it? That's not an answer. Lyra picked up a piece of bread and bit into it just to make Clara stop glaring. It tasted like sawdust, but she chewed and swallowed dutifully. There's talk, Clara said quietly. In the kitchens, the servants' quarters, people are saying you're making trouble, that you're inventing conspiracies to make yourself important. I'm translating documents. Documents that accuse dead men of treason, documents that suggest the kingdom's been infiltrated. You realize how that sounds? I realize how it is. Lyra set the bread down. Clara, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to find what I found. But it's there, in the language, in the treaties. Someone's been sabotaging this kingdom for years, and if people don't believe me, they don't. Most of them. Clara glanced at the door, then lowered her voice further. But the king does. And that's making the nobles nervous. There are rumors he's planning to void the treaties, cancel agreements, maybe even prepare for war. He should. Those treaties are traps. Maybe. But war means soldiers die. Families lose fathers and sons. Cities get burned. And if it turns out you're wrong, if you made a mistake in your translations, then all that blood is on your hands. Lyra's throat tightened. She hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so focused on the words, the meanings, the truth hidden in the text, that she hadn't considered the weight of what she was unleashing. I'm not wrong, she said, but her voice wavered. Clara softened slightly. I hope not. For your sake. She moved toward the door. Eat. Rest. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. Alone again, Lyra stared at the tray. The bread, the cheese, the small cup of watered wine. She forced herself to eat all of it. Then she picked up the next document and kept translating. The summons came at dawn. Lyra had fallen asleep at the desk, her cheek pressed against a half-translated contract. When someone shook her shoulder, she jerked awake, disoriented, and found a guard standing over her. King wants you. War room. Now. She followed him through corridors that felt different in the early morning light, quieter. The fortress was waking slowly, servants lighting fires, soldiers beginning drills. But the war room was already alive with tension. Kael stood at the head of the table, surrounded by advisors and military commanders. Maps covered every surface. Markers had been moved, redrawn, clustered in new positions. And in the center of it all sat a pile of documents, the ones Lyra had translated. Every eye in the room turned to her when she entered. Tell them, Kael said without preamble. What you told me. Lyra's mouth went dry. The room was full of men who looked at her like she was an interesting problem. Not a person. A problem. The treaties are compromised, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Multiple agreements over the past 7 years contain clauses that give the Eastern Lords legal rights to land, resources, and military passage. The clauses were hidden using linguistic tricks in Velrathis, word choices that seem innocent but carry specific legal weight in the old language. One of the commanders, a scarred man with iron-gray hair, scoffed. Legal weight? We're talking about war, girl, not courtroom debates. In the Old Kingdom, they were the same thing, Lyra shot back. Velrathis was used specifically because it was binding, unbreakable. If you made an oath in that language, you kept it or faced consequences. The Eastern Lords are using that against us. They can point to these treaties and claim legal justification for invasion. That's insane, another advisor said. No one respects those old laws anymore. The Eastern Lords do. Their entire culture is built on ancestor worship and ancient traditions.
They take this seriously. Lyra picked up one of the documents. This treaty here, it grants them passage rights for peaceful purposes. Except in Velrothis, the word used for peaceful is morshik, which actually means unopposed. They can march an army through our territory, and as long as we don't fight back, they're technically honoring the treaty. Silence.
Kale's expression was unreadable. Show them the land agreement. Lyra pulled out another document. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice firm. This one transfers ownership of the Black Ridge Mountains. The translation your previous advisor provided said it was mineral rights, but the actual phrasing is Korval Nethrin Torshek, which means sovereign claim to earth and stone. Not mining rights, ownership. That's our eastern defense line, the gray-haired commander said quietly. If they hold those mountains, they control the passes. We'd be fighting uphill for every mile. Exactly. Kale's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. We've been signing away our kingdom piece by piece, and we didn't even know it. Because one girl says so? The objection came from a nobleman Lyra didn't recognize, dressed in fine clothes that seemed out of place in a war room. Your Majesty, with respect, we only have her word that these translations are accurate. She could be manipulating the meanings to create panic. To what end? Kael asked coldly. I don't know. Perhaps she's working for the Eastern Lords. Perhaps this is a ploy to make us void legitimate treaties and give them actual justification for war. Lyra's temper flared. If I wanted to help the Eastern Lords, I'd keep my mouth shut and let you keep honoring treaties that are bleeding you dry. You'd what? You'd stay invisible in your tavern? The nobleman's smile was sharp. Instead, you conveniently appear at the exact moment we need a translator, with the exact skills required, and immediately start finding conspiracies. Forgive me if that seems orchestrated. Lord Brennan, Kael's voice was dangerously quiet. Are you accusing me of being fooled by a tavern girl? Brennan paled slightly. Of course not, Your Majesty. I'm simply suggesting we verify these translations before taking drastic action. With who? There's no one else alive who reads Velrothis fluently. Then perhaps we should consider why that is. Why this language died out. Why the texts were destroyed. Brennan gestured at Lyra. The old kings fell for a reason. Their language, their oaths, their entire system collapsed because it was corruptible. Using it now, trusting it now, seems like our only option, Ronan interrupted. He'd been silent until now, watching the exchange with hooded eyes. Unless you have a better suggestion, Brennan. I suggest caution. Caution got us into this mess. Ronan picked up one of the treaties. I've read these documents. Even without understanding Velrothis, the phrasing felt wrong, too formal, too specific. I mentioned it to the old translator, and he assured me it was just ceremonial language. He looked at Lyra. Was it? No, she said. Every word in Velrothis serves a purpose. There's no such thing as just ceremonial. If it's written down, it means something. Then we have a problem, Kyle said, because if these treaties are legitimate legal traps, we're already at war. We just don't know it yet. The room erupted in arguments, commanders debating military readiness, advisors shouting about diplomatic consequences, nobles worried about trade disruptions and economic collapse. Lyra stood there, feeling like she'd lit a fuse and stepped back to watch the explosion. Kael let them argue for exactly 1 minute. Then he slammed his fist on the table. The room went silent. Enough. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. Here's what we're going to do. Ronan, send scouts to every border. I want to know if the Eastern Lords are moving troops. Commander Thale, prepare the northern garrisons for possible mobilization. Don't start a war, but be ready if one starts. And the treaties? Brennan asked. We honor them, for now. But we're not signing anything new until every existing document has been translated and verified. Kael looked at Lyra. How long to finish the remaining documents? 2 weeks, maybe less if I don't sleep. Sleep, I need you sharp, not dead. He turned to the rest of the room. This meeting is over. Get to work. They filed out, some quickly, others lingering to whisper among themselves. Lyra caught fragments of conversation as they passed. Can't trust her. King's losing his mind. This is madness. When the room was empty except for Kael, Ronan, and Lyra, the king sank into a chair and rubbed his face. For the first time, he looked tired. You've made enemies, he said to Lyra. I noticed. They think you're lying, or delusional, or a spy. I know.
Are you any of those things? Lyra met his eyes. No. Kale studied her for a long moment. Then he said, I believe you. Not because I trust you. I don't trust anyone. But because what you're saying makes sense. I felt something wrong for years. Agreements that favored the Eastern Lords too much. Concessions that seemed unnecessary. My translator always had explanations, and I accepted them because I had no reason not to. His jaw tightened. I should have dug deeper. You couldn't have known. I'm the king. Knowing is my job. He stood abruptly. Finish the translations. Find every trap. And Lyra? Yes? Watch your back. If you're right about this, someone in this fortress helped set these traps, and they're not going to be happy you found them. He walked out. Ronan lingered. He's not wrong. You've painted a target on yourself. I didn't ask for this. Doesn't matter. You have it now. Ronan leaned against the table. For what it's worth, I think you're telling the truth. The translations make too much sense, and I've known Kael long enough to recognize when he's been played. Someone fooled him, someone he trusted. The old translator? Maybe. Or maybe someone was feeding him bad information, and he translated it faithfully. Ronan's expression darkened. Either way, there's rot in this court, and rot spreads. What should I do? Keep translating. Stay in your room when you're not working. Don't trust anyone. He moved toward the door, then paused. And if you find proof of who's behind this, tell Kael immediately. Not me. Not anyone else. Just him. Why? Ronan's smile was thin. Because if you tell the wrong person, you'll disappear, and no one will ever find your body. He left. Lyra stood alone in the war room, surrounded by maps and documents and the weight of a kingdom's fate. She thought correcting the king in the tavern was the dangerous part. She'd been wrong. The dangerous part was proving she was right. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to silence her mind. But it raced, circling the same thoughts over and over. Someone had sabotaged the kingdom, someone close to power, someone who understood Velrothis well enough to twist it, or who had access to someone who could. The old translator was dead. Convenient timing. Too convenient. But who would benefit from undermining Kael? The Eastern Lords, obviously, but they couldn't have done this alone. They needed an inside connection, someone who could influence which treaties got signed, which documents got translated, which concessions got made. Someone like Ronan. The thought made her sick. Ronan was the king's closest friend, his most trusted advisor, the man who'd served at his side for years. But he'd also been the one handling negotiations with the Eastern Lords. He'd been the one who brought documents to the old translator. He'd been in the perfect position to orchestrate exactly this kind of long-term betrayal, and he'd warned her not to trust anyone. Classic misdirection. Lyra sat up, heart hammering. She had no proof, just suspicion and circumstantial evidence. But in a court full of enemies, suspicion might be enough to get her killed if she voiced it to the wrong person. Kael had said to watch her back. Ronan had said the same thing. One of them was trying to protect her. The other might be trying to silence her. A sound outside her door made her freeze. Footsteps. Quiet. Deliberate. They stopped outside her room. Lyra's hand moved to the small knife she'd taken from the dinner tray earlier. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. She slid out of bed, moving silently, and positioned herself beside the door. The handle turned slowly. The door opened a crack. Lyra's breath caught. A figure slipped inside, hooded and silent. They closed the door carefully, then turned, and froze when they saw Lyra standing there with the knife. "Don't scream," a woman's voice whispered. The figure pulled back her hood. "Clara." Lyra lowered the knife slightly. "What are you doing here?" "Warning you." Clara's face was pale in the dim light from the window. "There's talk. Bad talk. Some of the nobles are saying you need to be dealt with, that you're too dangerous to keep around." "Dealt with?" "Disappeared. Silenced. I don't know exactly, but I heard Lord Brennan talking to someone in the kitchens. He thinks you're lying about the translations to manipulate the king. He's gathering support to have you removed." Lyra's stomach dropped. "Removed how?" "I don't know. But when nobles start whispering about tavern girls who know too much, bad things happen." Clara grabbed her arm. "You need to be careful. Don't eat or drink anything you haven't watched being prepared. Don't go anywhere alone. And for the love of all that's holy, don't trust anyone in this fortress." "Why are you helping me?" Clara hesitated. Because I've seen what happens to people who speak truth to power. They don't usually survive it, and you're either the bravest person I've met or you have a death wish. Either way, you don't deserve to die for being honest. I'm just translating. You're unraveling a conspiracy. That's not just anything. Clara moved toward the door. Keep that knife. And if anyone comes for you in the night, aim for the throat. She slipped out as quietly as she'd entered. Lyra locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and sat on the bed with the knife in her lap. She didn't sleep. She couldn't, because somewhere in this fortress, someone was planning to kill her, and she had no idea who. The next morning, Lyra went to the war room early, before dawn broke. The corridors were empty except for guards who barely glanced at her. She unlocked the small translation room, stepped inside, and froze. Her desk had been searched. Not obviously, not violently, but someone had gone through the documents. Papers were stacked differently. The inkwell had been moved slightly, and the translation notes she'd left carefully organized were now just slightly out of order. Someone had been looking for something or trying to alter something. Lyra's hand shook as she checked the documents. Everything seemed to be there. Nothing obviously missing. But the violation of it, the knowledge that someone had been in here, touching her work, searching through her findings, made her skin crawl. She spent the next hour rechecking every translation she'd already completed, making sure nothing had been changed. Everything matched her notes. Nothing seemed tampered with. But the message was clear. Someone was watching her. She was deep into translating a new document, a military alliance from 5 years ago, when she found it. Another trap. Worse than the others. This one granted the Eastern Lords the right to provide mutual defense assistance in times of crisis. Standard language for an alliance. Except the Velrothi's phrasing actually gave them the right to occupy northern fortresses for protective purposes, during any conflict, including conflicts they themselves started. It was a blank check for invasion disguised as friendship, and it had been signed by Kael himself. Lyra stared at the document, her mind racing. This wasn't just a betrayal by a translator. This was a trap that had been set at the highest level. Someone had convinced Kael to sign this. Someone he trusted. The door opened. Ronan stepped inside. Lyra's hand moved instinctively toward the knife hidden in her sleeve. Working early, Ronan observed. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, tension in his shoulders. Find anything new? Maybe? That's not an answer. Lyra hesitated. This was the moment. Tell him and risk him being the traitor, or stay silent and risk missing a chance to warn Kael. She made a decision. I need to speak to the king. Ronan's eyes narrowed. About what? Something I found. I need to show him directly. I'm his advisor. You can tell me. No offense, but my instructions were to report to the king, only the king. For a long moment, Ronan just looked at her. Then he said quietly, You don't trust me. I don't trust anyone. You told me not to. A ghost of a smile. Fair enough. He stepped back from the door. He's in the training yard. Go! Lyra gathered the document, tucked it carefully into her satchel, and walked past Ronan. She could feel his eyes on her back the entire way down the corridor. The training yard was a broad expanse of packed dirt surrounded by walls. Soldiers drilled in formation, their movements precise and brutal. Others sparred in pairs, wooden swords cracking against shields. And in the center of it all, Kael fought. He moved like violence made flesh. Every strike was calculated, efficient, devastating. His opponent, a massive soldier in padded armor, struggled to keep up. Within seconds, Kael had disarmed him, swept his legs, and put a blade to his throat. Again, Kael said. The soldier stood, panting, and raised his sword. They went again. Lyra waited at the edge of the yard, feeling out of place in her simple dress among all the armor and weapons. Several soldiers noticed her, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Word had spread, the tavern girl who was causing trouble. Finally, Kael ended the sparring match with a move so fast Lyra barely saw it. The soldier hit the ground hard, groaning, and Kael hauled him up with one hand. Better, the king said, but you're still telegraphing the overhead strike. Tighten it up. He turned, saw Lyra, and his expression shifted. Problem? I need to show you something, privately. Kael tossed his practiced sword to a waiting servant and walked over. This can't wait? No. He studied her face, then nodded. My study. Follow me. They walked in silence through the fortress. Kael's study was smaller than Lyra expected. A desk, Shelves lined with books and maps, a window overlooking the northern mountains. Functional. No decoration except a single banner bearing the Draven family crest. Kyle closed the door. Show me. Lyra pulled out the document with shaking hands. This is a military alliance from 5 years ago. It was translated as a mutual defense pact. I remember, standard agreement. We help them if they're attacked. They help us. That's what you were told. But the actual language... She spread the document on the desk. This clause here, Cornithrin Valshek Mortalis. Your translator said it meant mutual assistance in crisis. But in Velrothis, it actually means right of occupation for protective purposes during conflict. Any conflict, including ones they start. Kael went very still. They can occupy our fortresses, Lyra continued, her voice shaking. Legally, under the terms of this treaty. All they have to do is claim they're protecting us. From what? From anything. From themselves, if necessary. The language doesn't specify. It just gives them the right. Kyle picked up the document, read it himself, then set it down with a control that was more frightening than anger. Who brought me this treaty? I don't know. It was before I got here. Who translated it? Your old translator, the one who died. Convenient. Kale's voice was ice. Who else knows about this? Just you. I came straight here. He looked at her, and for the first time, Lyra saw something like respect in his eyes. You didn't tell Ronan. No. Why not? Because you told me to trust no one, and because whoever set these traps had access to you, had influence, had the ability to put documents in front of you and convince you to sign them. She met his gaze. That's not just a translator. That's someone you trusted. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Ronan's been with me for 12 years, since before I took the throne. He saved my life more times than I can count. I'm not accusing him. You're saying I can't trust anyone, including my oldest friend. Kale's laugh was bitter. Do you know how that feels? To look at people you've bled with, fought with, trusted with your life, and wonder if they're the knife in your back? No, but I know how it feels to be alone. Lyra's voice was quiet. I've been alone my whole life, invisible. Surviving by not mattering to anyone. And now I matter, and it's terrifying, and I don't know who wants to help me and who wants me dead. So yeah, I understand not knowing who to trust. Kael looked at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not his cold predator smile, something almost genuine. You've got steel in you, tavern girl. Lyra, my name is Lyra. I know your name. He picked up the document again. I'm going to find out who did this. Who signed these treaties? Who brought them to me? And when I do... His expression hardened. They'll wish they'd died with the old translator. A knock at the door. Kale's hand moved to his sword instinctively. What? The door opened. A guard stepped inside, face pale. Your Majesty, the scouts are back from the eastern border. And? You need to come see this. They followed the guard to the battlements. Other advisors were already there. Ronan, Commander Thale, Lord Brennan. Others Lyra didn't recognize. They all stood looking east, their faces grim. Lyra looked, and her blood turned to ice. In the distance, visible even from the fortress, campfires dotted the landscape like fallen stars. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And moving between them, barely visible in the morning light, were columns of soldiers. The Eastern Lords had brought an army to the border. And based on the treaties Lyra had translated, they had every legal right to cross it. How many? Kale's voice was steady, but Lyra heard the tension underneath. 15,000, maybe more. Commander Thale's face was carved from stone. They're camped 3 miles from the border, not moving yet, just waiting. Waiting for what? Permission, Lyra heard herself say. Every head turned to her. They're waiting for us to honor the treaties, to let them cross. Because according to the agreements you signed, they have the right to occupy our territory for mutual defense. All they need is an excuse. Lord Brennan's face twisted. This is your fault. Your translation started this. My translations revealed this, Lyra shot back. The army was always coming. I just told you why. Enough. Kale's voice cut through the rising argument. How long do we have? Before they move? Commander Thale shrugged. Hours, days. Depends on what they're waiting for. Kale stared at the campfires, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Lyra. Finish the translations, all of them. I need to know every trap they've laid. And then? His smile was cold and sharp as a blade. Then we spring a few traps of our own. Lyra didn't sleep for the next 48 hours.
She worked through the night, through meals Clara brought and left untouched, through the ache in her back and the blur in her vision. The remaining documents piled on her desk like accusations, each one potentially hiding another knife aimed at the kingdom's throat. Outside, the Eastern Army waited. Inside, the fortress prepared for war. She could hear it through the walls, the clang of weapons being sharpened, the shouts of commanders drilling troops, the rumble of supply wagons rolling through the courtyard. The entire fortress had shifted into something harder, sharper, like a beast baring its teeth. Lyra found 3 more compromised treaties in those 2 days. A fishing rights agreement that actually ceded control of the northern coastline. A prisoner exchange protocol that allowed Eastern soldiers to enter the kingdom for humanitarian purposes without restriction. A seemingly innocent trade tariff that, in Waitress, granted them tax-free passage for commercial goods, a term broad enough to include weapons, armor, and siege equipment. Each discovery made her sicker. Someone had been dismantling this kingdom piece by piece for years. Patient, methodical, brilliant. And whoever they were, they'd done it from inside the fortress. She was translating the final document, a border patrol agreement from 3 years ago, when she found the signature, not on the treaty itself, on a notation in the margin, written in Waitress. A small mark that most people would overlook, would assume was decorative or ceremonial. But Lyra read it, and her world tilted sideways. The notation was a validator's mark. In the Old Kingdom, important documents required not just a signature, but a witness. Someone who verified the translation was accurate and the terms were understood. The mark identified who had performed that verification. This mark belonged to Ronan Vale. Lyra stared at it until the letters blurred. Then she checked the other compromised documents, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the pages. 3 of them had the same mark. Ronan had verified these translations, had told the old translator, or told Kael directly, that the terms were accurate and fair. He'd lied. For years he'd lied. Lyra's breath came short and fast. She wanted to be wrong, wanted there to be another explanation. Maybe the marks were forged. Maybe someone else had used Ronan's seal. Maybe... The door opened. Lyra jumped, scattering papers, her hand flying to the knife in her sleeve. Ronan stood in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ronan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His expression was calm, almost gentle, like he was visiting a sick friend. "You found it," he said quietly. Lyra's throat closed. "Found what?" "Don't insult me, Lyra. You're too smart for that." He gestured at the documents. "You found my mark, my verification, my hand in all of this." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Ronan crossed to the desk, picked up one of the treaties, and studied it with something like nostalgia. "Do you know how long I've been planning this?" 12 years, since before Kael even took the throne. I've been setting traps, signing away pieces of this kingdom, building toward this moment. Why? The word came out as a whisper. "Because he killed my brother." Lyra blinked. "What?" Ronan set the document down carefully. When Kael challenged his father for the throne, it wasn't a fair fight. The old king was weak, yes, but he wasn't alone. He had guards, advisors, people loyal to him. My brother was one of them. His voice was calm, conversational, like he was discussing the weather. Kael cut through them all, 10 men. My brother was the 5th. He died trying to protect a king who didn't deserve protection, and Kael stepped over his body like it was nothing. "You were there?" "I watched. I was younger then, just another soldier. No one important. No one Kael noticed." Ronan's smile was bitter. "But I noticed him. I saw what he was. A killer. A man who takes what he wants and destroys anyone in his way. And I swore I'd make him pay." Lyra's mind raced. "So you befriended him, became his advisor, gained his trust." "More than that. I became indispensable. I learned everything about him, his strategies, his weaknesses, his blind spots. And I used that knowledge to hollow out his kingdom from the inside." Ronan leaned against the desk. "The Eastern lords were easy to manipulate. They wanted expansion, and I gave them a roadmap. All they had to do was wait while I signed away Kael's defenses piece by piece. The old translators
Was faithful until the end.
He really didn't know Velrothis as well as he claimed. I fed him translations, and he accepted them because he trusted me. When he started having doubts, when he began actually studying the language properly, Ronan shrugged. His heart gave out. Very tragic. Very convenient. Lyra felt bile rise in her throat. You murdered him.
I protected the plan. There's a difference. Ronan's eyes were cold now, all pretense of gentleness gone. And then you appeared, a tavern girl who could actually read Velrothis. What were the odds? You tried to have me killed.
I tried to have you discredited. Having you killed would have made Kael suspicious. Better to make you look crazy, paranoid, a liar seeking attention. But you were too good. Too accurate. You found every trap I'd laid, and now... He gestured at the documents. Now you found me. Kael will...
Kael will what? Believe you? Ronan laughed. I'm his oldest friend. The man who saved his life a dozen times. The advisor he trusts more than anyone. You're a servant girl he's known for a week. Who do you think he'll believe when I tell him you're lying? The evidence
can be explained. I verified translations based on what the old scholar told me. I was deceived just like Kael was. Very tragic. Very believable. Ronan pushed off from the desk. But it doesn't matter anymore. The army is here. The traps are sprung. Whether Kael believes you or not, the kingdom is already lost. Lyra's hand tightened on the knife hidden in her sleeve. I won't let you... She didn't see him move. One moment he was standing casually by the desk. The next, his hand was around her wrist, squeezing until her fingers went numb and the knife clattered to the floor. You're brave, Ronan said, his face inches from hers. I'll give you that. Stupid, but brave. He shoved her backward. She hit the wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Unfortunately, brave doesn't keep you alive. He picked up the knife, tested its weight, then tucked it into his belt. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to have an accident. A terrible fall from the battlements. Everyone knows you've been working too hard, not sleeping, barely eating. People will say the stress got to you. Very tragic. Lyra struggled to breathe, her vision swimming. Kael will know. Kael will grieve, then he'll move on. He always does. Ronan grabbed her arm, yanked her toward the door. Come on, let's get this over with. Lyra's mind raced. She was smaller than Ronan, weaker, untrained in combat. But she'd survived in Ashmar's streets, survived in a tavern full of violent drunks, survived by being smarter than the people who underestimated her. She went limp. Ronan, expecting resistance, stumbled slightly when her weight shifted. It wasn't much, just a second of imbalance, but it was enough. Lyra drove her elbow into his ribs with every ounce of strength she had. Ronan grunted, his grip loosening, and Lyra tore free. She ran for the door, grabbed the handle. His hand slammed it shut. Clever, he said, breathing hard, but not clever enough. He grabbed her by the hair and hauled her backward. Lyra screamed, clawed at his hand, kicked at his legs. Her foot connected with his knee and he swore, but didn't let go. Then the door exploded inward. Kael stood in the doorway, sword drawn, his face carved from fury. Behind him, Commander Thael and 4 guards filled the corridor. Ronan froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Kael's voice, colder than winter, filled the room. Let her go. Ronan's hand tightened in Lyra's hair. Kael, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're attacking a woman under my protection. What exactly am I misunderstanding? She's lying to you, manipulating you. I found evidence. Evidence? Kael stepped into the room. Like the evidence Lyra found? The validator's marks on compromised treaties? Your marks, Ronan? Ronan went very still. Did you think I wouldn't check? Kael's voice was soft, deadly. Did you think I'd just take your word when you told me those marks were standard procedure? I had them examined by every remaining scholar in the kingdom. They all said the same thing. Those marks mean you verified the translations personally. You approved them. I was deceived by the old translator. The old translator who conveniently died before Lyra could question him? Kael advanced slowly, his sword steady. The translator who, according to servants, received visits from you every week, sometimes twice a week? Strange, since you always told me you barely knew him. Ronan's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. My mistake was trusting you. Kael's voice cracked like a whip. 12 years, Ronan. 12 years you stood at my side. Fought with me, bled with me.
and all of it was a lie. Not all of it. For the first time, emotion broke through Ronan's calm facade. I did save your life, multiple times. That was real. Why? Why keep me alive if you wanted revenge?
Because death would have been too quick. Ronan shoved Lyra away. She stumbled, caught herself against the desk.
You killed my brother, Kael. You cut him down like he was nothing. I wanted you to feel what that's like, to watch everything you built crumble, to lose your kingdom piece by piece and know you were helpless to stop it. Your brother died fighting for a corrupt king. He died fighting for honor, for loyalty. Concepts you don't understand. I understand betrayal. Kael's voice was ice. I understand that you've sold out your entire kingdom, doomed thousands of people, all for revenge against one man. That's not honor. That's cowardice. Ronan's laugh was bitter. Says the man who murdered his father. I challenged him according to law, single combat, witnessed and sanctioned. What you've done, Kael gestured at the documents scattered across the desk. This is poison. This is the act of someone too afraid to face me directly. I'm not afraid of you. Then prove it. Kael lowered his sword. Single combat. Here. Now. You win, you walk free. I win, you die. Same terms I gave my father. Commander Thales stepped forward. Your Majesty, you can't... I can. Kael's eyes never left Ronan. Well, do you have the courage your brother had, or are you going to hide behind excuses? For a long moment, Ronan said nothing. Then, slowly, he drew his sword. Clear the room, Kael ordered. Your Majesty. Thaley tried again. Clear the room. The guards hesitated, then backed into the corridor. Thaley grabbed Lyra's arm, pulled her toward the door. She resisted, watching Kael and Ronan circle each other like wolves. We have to go, Thaley said quietly. This isn't our fight. He'll kill Kael. Maybe. Maybe not. But if we stay, we dishonor the challenge. Come on. Lyra let herself be pulled into the corridor. The guards formed a barrier, preventing anyone from entering. Through the doorway, she could see Kael and Ronan facing each other, swords raised. 12 years, Kael said softly. And you never once wavered. Never once showed doubt. You're a better actor than I gave you credit for. I told you, not all of it was acting. Ronan's grip tightened on his sword. Part of me did respect you, admire you. That's what made it so perfect. You never suspected because I never fully lied. I just never told you the whole truth. That ends now. Yes, it does. They moved. Lyra had never seen anything like it. When Kael fought in the training yard, it was brutal and efficient. This was something else entirely. This was rage channeled into violence, betrayal given form and steel. The swords met with a sound like a bell being struck. Ronan attacked with the precision of a man who'd trained his entire life. Every strike calculated to exploit openings, test defenses. Kael defended with the cold fury of a king who'd been lied to by the person he trusted most. They fought through the small room, smashing into furniture, scattering documents. Lyra's translations fluttered to the floor, trampled and torn. Ronan was good. Better than good. He moved like water, flowing around Kael's strikes, finding angles that shouldn't exist. He scored a hit across Kael's shoulder, drawing blood, and pressed the advantage. But Kael was better. He absorbed the hit, used the momentum to spin inside Ronan's guard, and drove his elbow into Ronan's face. Bone crunched. Ronan staggered back, blood pouring from his nose, and Kael's sword blurred through the space where his head had been a second earlier. You taught me that move, Kael said coldly. Remember? After the ambush at Thornwatch, you said always follow an injury with overwhelming force. Ronan spat blood. I taught you too well. No, you just forgot who you were teaching. They crashed together again, swords screaming against each other. Ronan fought with desperation now, with the fury of a man who dedicated years to revenge only to watch it crumble. Kael fought with the cold certainty of someone who'd already accepted the cost. Lyra watched through the doorway, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. She wanted to look away. Couldn't. Ronan made his mistake 3 minutes into the fight. He overextended on a lunge, committed too fully to a strike aimed at Kael's heart. Kael sidestepped, caught Ronan's wrist, and twisted. The sword fell from nerveless fingers. Kael's blade found Ronan's throat. They stood frozen, both breathing hard, blood and sweat mixing on their faces. You could have been great, Kael said quietly. If you'd channeled all this intelligence, this dedication, into something other than revenge, you could have been the greatest advisor a king ever had. I didn't want to be great. Ronan's voice was hoarse. I wanted you to suffer. Then you failed. Because watching you betray me, that hurt. But winning this kingdom back from the edge you pushed it to, that's going to be satisfying. Kale's sword moved. Ronan collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Lyra turned away, bile rising in her throat. Kale stood over the body of his oldest friend, his sword dripping red, his face expressionless. Then he knelt, closed Ronan's eyes, and said something too quiet for Lyra to hear. When he stood, he was the king again, all emotion locked away behind walls of ice and duty. "Commander!" he called. Thale entered, saw the body, and showed no surprise. "Your Majesty, Ronan Vale was a traitor. He confessed to selling our treaties to the Eastern Lords, to undermining the kingdom, to murdering the royal translator. His body will be burned without ceremony. His name will be struck from all records. He dies forgotten." "Yes, Your Majesty." Kale looked at Lyra. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Good." He wiped his sword clean on a fallen tapestry. "How many documents are left to translate?" "None. I finished the last one before—" She gestured vaguely at the room. "And? 6 more compromised treaties. The kingdom's been giving away territory, rights, and resources for 7 years. Everything from fishing rights to fortress access." Kyle absorbed this without expression. "Can they be voided?" "Legally? Under Velrothi's law, no. The language is binding. Once sworn in the old tongue, the oaths hold. Then we don't void them legally." Kale sheathed his sword. "We burn them, publicly, and we tell the Eastern Lords that we reject every treaty signed in the last decade. If they want war over it, they'll get war. They have 15,000 soldiers on our border, and we have the truth, and fortresses they don't actually control, despite what the treaties say." Kyle's smile was sharp. Ronan was smart, but he made one critical mistake. He assumed I'd honor agreements made through deception. He was wrong. The Eastern Lords won't see it that way. I don't care what they see. I care what they can prove. Kyle gestured at the scattered documents. "Gather every compromised treaty, every note, every translation. We're going to show the kingdom exactly how we were betrayed." Lyra knelt and started collecting papers with shaking hands. Kale helped her, and for a few minutes they worked in silence, stepping carefully around Ronan's body. "I'm sorry," Lyra said quietly. "For what?" "That it was him. That someone you trusted." "Don't!" Kale's voice was sharp. "Don't apologize for telling me the truth. Ronan made his choices. He lived with them. And he died for them. That's not your fault. If I hadn't found the marks, then he'd still be sabotaging the kingdom, and we'd already be occupied by an enemy army." Kyle looked at her. "You saved us, Lyra. Maybe not the way anyone expected. Maybe not cleanly, but you saved us." Footsteps in the corridor. Clara appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, blood, bodies, scattered papers, and went pale. "The council is demanding to see you," she said to Kale. "Lord Brennan is calling for an emergency session, something about the Eastern Army." "Let them wait." Kale stood, brushing dust from his hands. "I have something more important to do first." He walked out. Lyra and Clara looked at each other. "What happened?" Clara whispered. "Ronan was the traitor. He confessed. Kale killed him." Clara's eyes widened. "The king's best friend. Wasn't his friend at all." They stood in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of it. Then Clara said, "You need to come with me. Because the council is angry, half the nobles are calling for your head, and the only thing keeping you alive right now is the king's protection, which means you need to stay close to him, always." Lyra looked down at the papers in her hands, evidence of years of betrayal, careful treachery, patient revenge. She'd come to this fortress a week ago, thinking she was just going to translate some old documents. Now she held the fate of a kingdom. "Come on," Clara urged, "before someone decides to make you disappear while the king is distracted." They hurried through corridors that felt more hostile than before. Servants stepped aside, their expressions ranging from fearful to angry. Word had spread. The tavern girl had accused the king's best friend, had gotten him killed. Never mind that Ronan had confessed. Never mind the evidence. People believed what they wanted to believe. The council chamber was chaos.
Nobles shouted over each other, their voices echoing off stone walls. Maps covered the main table, markers scattered across them showing troop positions, supply lines, defensive formations. At the head of the table, Kael stood like a pillar of ice, letting the storm rage around him. Lyra slipped in through a side door, staying close to the wall. Lord Brennan was mid-rant when he noticed her. And there she is, the girl who started all of this, the girl whose lies got Ronan Vale killed.
Ronan Vale killed himself, Kael said coldly, by betraying his kingdom. You have only her word for that. I have his confession. Witnessed by Commander Thale and 4 guards. I have documents with his verification marks on compromised treaties. I have years of evidence that he was systematically undermining this kingdom. Kael's voice could have frozen fire. What I don't have is patience for this argument. Your Majesty. Another noble, younger, with the soft hands of someone who'd never held a sword. Even if Ronan was guilty, killing him without trial, he had a trial. Single combat. Same as my father. Same as anyone who challenges for the throne or is accused of treason at the highest level. It's traditional, it's legal, and it's done. But the Eastern Army
Is our next problem. Kael slammed his hand on the table. Silence fell. Here's what's going to happen. Every compromised treaty, every agreement signed in the last decade will be publicly burned. We're voiding them all. The room exploded again. Economic disaster. Provoke war. Legal implications.
Enough! Kael's roar silenced them. Those treaties were signed based on fraudulent translations. They were designed to undermine this kingdom and pave the way for invasion. We will not honor them. We will not negotiate over them. We will burn them and dare the Eastern Lords to complain. They'll invade, Brennan said flatly. Let them try. Kael gestured at the map. They have 15,000 soldiers. We have fortified positions, supply lines they don't control despite what the treaties say, and the advantage of defending our own territory. More importantly, we have the truth on our side. Truth doesn't win wars, no, but it rallies people. And right now, we need every person in this kingdom ready to fight. Kael looked around the table. Send messengers to every city, every town, every village. Tell them what happened. Tell them Ronan Vale betrayed us. Tell them the Eastern Lords are coming, and tell them we're going to make them regret it. And if we lose, someone asked quietly, then we lose knowing we fought for something real. Not for treaties built on lies. Not for a peace bought through betrayal. We fight for this kingdom. Our kingdom. Kael's eyes found Lyra across the room. And we fight because one brave woman told us the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Every eye turned to her. Lyra felt like she was being crushed by the weight of their stares. Some angry, some calculating. A few, very few, respectful. Lyra Vexley, Kael said formally. Approach. Her legs moved without conscious thought. She walked to the table, every step feeling like walking through deep water. Kael waited until she stood before him. Then, to her shock, he bowed. Not deeply, not the full bow of a subject to a king, but the slight bow of one equal acknowledging another. You saved this kingdom, he said, not with a sword, not with an army, with knowledge, with courage, with the willingness to speak truth even when it put you in danger. He straightened. I name you royal translator, first of your position, and I give you my word, the word of a king, that you will be protected, honored, and heard in this court. Lyra's throat closed. You're the woman who saw what no one else could see, who stood up when everyone else bowed down, who proved that power doesn't just come from swords and armies. Kael's voice softened slightly. You're exactly what this kingdom needs, whether you believe it or not. She managed a nod, not trusting herself to speak. The council erupted in fresh arguments, some supporting the appointment, others calling it madness. Kael let them argue for exactly 30 seconds. Then he said, Get out, all of you. Prepare for war. I want supply lines secured, troops mobilized, and defenses reinforced by dawn. Move. They moved. Within minutes, the chamber cleared, leaving only Kael, Lyra, and Commander Thale. Kael sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. That went better than expected. Half of them want her dead, Thale observed. Only half? I'm disappointed. Kael looked at Lyra. You understand what I just did, right? By naming you royal translator, I made you a target. Every noble who opposes me, every person who wants to see this kingdom fall,
They'll come after you. I know. And you're still willing to do this? Lyra thought about the tavern, about being invisible, about a life spent surviving instead of living. Yes, she said. Kael smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. Good. Because we're about to walk into fire, and I need people I can trust beside me. A guard burst through the door, breathing hard. Your Majesty, the Eastern Army is moving. The smile vanished. Moving where? Toward the border. They're preparing to cross. Kael stood, all exhaustion gone, replaced by cold focus. How long? Hours, maybe less. Mobilize the northern garrison. Send riders to every fortress within a day's march, and bring me the compromise treaties. Kael looked at Lyra. All of them. We're going to make a statement. An hour later, Lyra stood on the battlements watching as every treaty Ronan had corrupted was piled in the fortress courtyard. Soldiers surrounded the pile, torches ready. Below, citizens of Ashmar had gathered, drawn by rumors and the promise of something significant. They filled the courtyard, spilled into the streets, climbed onto rooftops for a better view. Kyle stood before them, backlit by torches, his voice carrying across the crowd. For 7 years, he called, this kingdom has been betrayed, not by enemies on our borders, but by someone we trusted, someone close to the throne. Ronan Vale, my advisor, my friend, systematically sold our future to the Eastern Lords through fraudulent treaties and lies. The crowd murmured, shocked whispers spreading like fire. He's dead now, killed in single combat after confessing his crimes, but his betrayal lives on in these documents. Kael gestured at the pile. Treaties that give away our land, our rights, our sovereignty, all of it hidden in a language no one could read. Until her. He pointed at Lyra. She stood frozen as thousands of eyes found her. Lyra Vexley discovered the truth. She translated every treaty, found every trap, and had the courage to tell me what she found. Even knowing it could cost her life, even knowing I might not believe her, she told the truth anyway. Kael picked up a torch. These treaties are worthless. They were signed based on lies, and we will not honor them. He threw the torch onto the pile. The documents caught immediately, flames racing through paper and parchment, years of careful betrayal burning away in minutes. The crowd roared. Kael let them, let the anger and fear and relief wash over the fortress. Then he raised his hand, and silence fell again. The Eastern Lords are coming, he said. They think we'll surrender. They think these treaties give them the right to walk into our kingdom and take what they want. They're wrong. Another roar, louder this time. We will not surrender. We will not bow. We will not let betrayal and deception destroy what generations built. If they want war, we'll give them war, and we'll make them regret every step they take into our territory. The crowd erupted in cheers and battle cries. Lyra watched the treaties burn, felt the heat from the fire wash over her face, and realized she'd just become part of something far bigger than herself. She'd started this week invisible. Now she stood beside a king, watching the foundations of war being laid. And somewhere beyond the walls, an army was coming for them all. The Eastern Army reached the border at dawn. Lyra watched from the battlements as 15,000 soldiers arranged themselves across the frozen plain like pieces on a game board. Their banners snapped in the wind, crimson and gold, the colors of the Eastern Lords. Their armor gleamed even in the weak morning light. And at their head, mounted on war horses that steamed in the cold air, sat the commanders who'd been promised a kingdom through carefully worded lies. They looked confident. They looked like they'd already won. Kael stood beside her, arms crossed, studying the enemy formation with the detached interest of someone examining an interesting problem. Commander Thale was on his other side, squinting through a looking glass. Cavalry on the wings, Thale muttered. Infantry in the center. Archers behind. Standard formation. Nothing creative. They don't think they need creativity, Kael said. They think they can just march in and claim what the treaties promised them. Can they? Lyra asked quietly. Legally, under Velrothis law, if we honored those treaties, yes, they could occupy every fortress we agreed to give them access to. Kael's smile was cold. But we're not honoring the treaties, which makes this interesting. A rider broke from the eastern lines carrying a white flag. He rode to the midpoint between the armies and stopped, waiting. They want to talk, Thale said. Of course they do. They want to remind us of our obligations and demand we surrender peacefully. Kael turned to Lyra. Come with me. What? Why? Because you're the royal translator.
and because I want them to see the woman who destroyed their plans. Lyra's stomach dropped. Kale, I can't. I'm not. You're exactly what you need to be. Now come on. We're making them wait, but not too long. Don't want to seem desperate.
They rode out with an escort of 10 soldiers, carrying their own white flag. The no-man's land between the armies was a stretch of frozen ground littered with rocks and patches of ice. The wind cut through Lyra's cloak like knives. The eastern representative was a tall man in ornate armor, his face hidden behind a helm decorated with golden scrollwork. When he spoke, his voice was muffled but clear. I am Lord Commander Tavist, representing the Council of Eastern Lords. I come under flag of truce to discuss terms of compliance with existing treaties between our peoples. Compliance? Kale's voice was dangerously pleasant. Interesting word choice. The treaties are clear, Your Majesty. Multiple agreements grant us right of passage, territorial access, and resource allocation. We are here to claim what is legally owed. Those treaties are void. Tavist's posture stiffened. You cannot simply void legally binding agreements signed in Velrathis. The ancient tongue does not permit such breaches. The ancient tongue also doesn't permit fraud, Lyra heard herself say. Tavist's helm turned toward her. And who are you? Lyra Vexley, royal translator, the person who actually read those treaties you're relying on. A translator? Tavist's tone dripped condescension. Forgive me if I don't accept the interpretation of... The treaties were falsified, Lyra interrupted, her voice stronger now. The translations King Kale received were deliberately altered to hide clauses that favored the Eastern Lords. The man responsible confessed and is dead. The agreements were signed under false pretenses, which under Velrathis law makes them voidable. Silence. Then Tavist laughed. You expect us to believe that? That your king was somehow tricked into signing away his kingdom? I expect you to understand Velrathis law, Lyra shot back. Article of Binding, subsection 3. Any oath sworn under deception carries no weight, and the deceived party may nullify without consequence. That's direct text from the Code of Ancient Kings. Do you dispute it? Another silence. Longer this time. You speak the old tongue? Tavist asked, and now his voice held uncertainty. Fluently. Do you? I have advisors. I didn't ask about your advisors. I asked about you. Can you read Velrathis? Can you verify that your own copies of these treaties say what you think they say? No answer. Kyle smiled. My translator has a point, Lord Commander. How do you know your own people haven't lied to you? How do you know those treaties are legitimate? Because they were verified by your own advisor. Ronan Vale personally confirmed. Ronan Vale was a traitor, Kyle said flatly. He spent 12 years undermining my kingdom as revenge for his brother's death. He falsified translations, corrupted treaties, and sold us out to you piece by piece. And when his treachery was discovered, he confessed in front of witnesses before dying in single combat. Tavist's horse shifted nervously beneath him. You're lying. Am I? Ask your own commanders. Ask them if Ronan Vale ever contacted them directly. Ask them if he promised them an easy conquest. Ask them how a translator's death and a servant girl's appearance could unravel years of careful planning. Kael leaned forward in his saddle. The only people lying here are the ones who convinced you this was legal. We have 15,000 soldiers, and we have the truth. We have fortresses you don't actually control. We have supply lines you can't access. And we have a population that now knows exactly how you tried to steal their kingdom through legal manipulation. Kyle's voice hardened. March your army home, Lord Commander. Tell your masters the treaties are void. Tell them if they want this territory, they'll have to take it by force, and we'll make them bleed for every mile. You're declaring war. No. You declared war when you tried to conquer us through fraud. I'm just refusing to make it easy for you. Tavis sat perfectly still for a long moment. Then he said, The council will not accept this. The council can try explaining to their own people why 15,000 soldiers are dying in foreign territory over treaties that were invalid from the start. How long do you think that'll take? How many of those soldiers will desert when they realize they're fighting for a lie? You presume too much. I presume you're smarter than your masters, that you can see the difference between a legitimate campaign and a doomed gamble. Kael gestured at the army behind Tavist. Those soldiers trust you to lead them wisely. Are you going to march them into a meat grinder over paperwork? Tavist's helm turned, looking back at his own forces. Lyra could almost see the calculation happening behind the golden scrollwork. We will withdraw, he said finally, but only to consult with the council. This is not over. Fair enough? But next time you come with an army, make sure you're actually entitled to what you're claiming. Otherwise, you're just invaders, and we kill invaders. Tavis jerked his horse around and rode back toward his lines without another word. Kyle watched him go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Lyra. Well done. I just quoted the code. You just made a professional soldier doubt his own mission using nothing but knowledge and confidence. That's not just anything. Kyle turned his horse. Come on, let's see if it worked. They rode back to their own lines in silence. Behind them, the Eastern Army remained motionless, banners snapping in the wind, waiting. By midday, scouts reported movement in the eastern camp. Not an advance, a withdrawal. Slowly, carefully, the army began pulling back from the border. Not fleeing, this was too organized for that, but retreating with military precision. By sunset, they were 3 miles from the border. By the next morning, they were gone entirely, leaving only trampled ground and cold fire pits as evidence they'd been there at all. The fortress erupted in celebration. Soldiers cheered on the battlements. Servants danced in the courtyard. Nobles who'd been demanding Lyra's head the day before now nodded to her in grudging respect when she passed in the corridors. Kyle called an emergency council session. This time, when Lyra entered the chamber, the hostility had shifted to something else. Not quite acceptance. She could still see calculation in their eyes, but recognition. They couldn't dismiss her anymore. She'd stood before an enemy army and made them retreat with words. That commanded respect, whether they liked it or not. The Eastern Lords have withdrawn, Kale announced. For now. They'll regroup, consult with their council, possibly try again. But we've bought time. Time for what? Lord Brennan asked. He looked older than he had a week ago, the stress carving new lines into his face. Time to rebuild. Time to secure actual alliances instead of fraudulent ones. Time to make sure this never happens again. Kale looked around the table. We were vulnerable because we relied on one translator, one man whose death or corruption could undermine everything. That changes now. How? Someone asked. We train more translators. We establish a school dedicated to ancient languages, starting with Velrothis. We make this knowledge accessible so it can never be weaponized against us again. That will take years. Then we start now. Kyle gestured to Lyra. Our royal translator will oversee the program. She'll select students, develop curriculum, ensure the language is taught properly. And every treaty, every contract, every agreement this kingdom signs will be translated by multiple independent sources and verified before any king puts their seal on it. Murmurs around the table, some approving, some skeptical. In the meantime, Kyle continued, we renegotiate with our neighbors. Honest terms this time. Fair agreements that don't hide traps in ancient grammar. We rebuild our reputation as a kingdom that keeps its word, because our word will actually mean what we say it means. And if the Eastern Lords return with a larger army, Brennan pressed, then we fight. But we fight from a position of strength, with fortifications they don't have legal access to, with supply lines they can't claim rights over, and with a population that knows exactly what they're fighting against. Kale's eyes swept the council. We were nearly conquered by paperwork. We won't make that mistake again. The session lasted 3 more hours, dissolving into debates about military readiness, diplomatic outreach, and economic recovery. Lyra sat through most of it in a daze, still processing the fact that she now had a title, authority, and responsibilities that extended far beyond translating documents in a closet-sized room. When it finally ended, she fled to the battlements, needing air and space to think. Clara found her there an hour later, wrapped in her cloak against the cold. You're famous, Clara said, leaning against the stone wall beside her. I don't want to be famous. I want to be invisible again. Too late for that. There are songs about you already. The servants are singing them in the kitchens. Lyra groaned. Songs? The tavern girl who saved a kingdom. It's actually pretty catchy. Terrible rhyme scheme, but catchy. Clara smiled. You should be proud. You did something impossible. I just read some documents. You exposed a conspiracy, saved the kingdom from invasion, and made an army retreat without a single sword being drawn. That's not just anything. Clara's expression softened. People like us, servants, invisible people, we're not supposed to matter. But you proved we can. You proved that knowledge matters as much as swords, maybe more.
It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like I barely survived.
Most victories feel like that. The clean ones only exist in songs. Clara squeezed her shoulder. But you did survive, and now you get to decide what comes next. That's more than most people ever get. Lyra looked out over Ashmar. The city sprawled below the fortress, lit by thousands of cookfires and lanterns. People down there were celebrating, drinking, probably telling exaggerated stories about what had happened. They didn't know how close they'd come to occupation. How many of them would have died if the Eastern Lords had actually invaded? They didn't need to know. They just needed to believe they were safe. And for now, they were. Footsteps behind them. Kale emerged from the stairwell, still in his armor, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Lyra. A word? Clara took the hint and disappeared down the stairs. Kyle joined Lyra at the wall, looking out over the city with the same tired expression. I owe you an apology, he said after a moment. Lyra blinked. For what? For putting you in danger, for making you a target, for dragging you into a situation that could have gotten you killed. He turned to face her. You didn't ask for any of this. You were just trying to survive, and I pulled you into court politics, conspiracies, and damn near started a war around you. You didn't drag me. I corrected you in that tavern. I chose to speak. You chose honesty. I chose to exploit it. Kale's jaw tightened. I've made a lot of decisions as king, some good, some terrible, but naming you royal translator without asking if you even wanted the position, that might be one of the worst. Why? Because you deserved a choice. Deserved to decide if you wanted this life or if you'd rather go back to being invisible. He pulled something from his pocket, a small pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. There's enough here to start over anywhere in the kingdom. New city, new name, new life, if you want it. Lyra stared at the pouch. A week ago, she would have taken it without hesitation, would have run as far and fast as she could from this fortress, this court, this crushing weight of responsibility. But something had changed. She'd spent her entire life being invisible because being seen was dangerous. And it had kept her alive, yes, but it had also kept her small, powerless, forgettable. Now people saw her, feared her, respected her, resented her, but they saw her, and she realized she didn't want to disappear again. Keep your coin, she said quietly. Lyra, I'm not leaving. I'm not running. I'm staying. She met his eyes. Not because you named me translator, not because of the title or the position or whatever authority comes with it. I'm staying because what we're building here matters. Teaching people Velrathis, making sure ancient knowledge isn't lost or weaponized, ensuring treaties actually mean what they say, that matters. It's dangerous work. So is serving in a tavern full of drunk soldiers. At least this danger serves a purpose. She smiled slightly. Besides, someone has to make sure you don't sign any more fraudulent treaties. Might as well be me. Kale studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled back. You're either very brave or completely insane. I've been told they're the same thing. He laughed. Actually laughed, the sound rough and surprised. Fair enough. He pocketed the coin pouch. Then welcome to the most thankless job in the kingdom. You'll work impossible hours, make enemies in every faction, and constantly risk assassination by people who preferred it when power came from swords instead of words. Sounds perfect. You're definitely insane. But his tone was warm. We start building the translation school next week. I'll need you to help select the first students, people you trust to learn without corrupting the knowledge. That's a tall order. You'll figure it out. You figured out everything else. Kale turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The nobles are planning something. I don't know what yet, but Brennan's been meeting with others in private, whispered conversations that stop when I enter rooms. You think they're planning to move against you? Against us. You're part of the crown's authority now. That makes you a target for anyone who wants to weaken my position. His expression hardened. Watch your back. Trust Clara. She's proven loyal, but be careful around everyone else. Even you? Kale's smile was sharp. Especially me. I'm a king. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. He left. Lyra stood alone on the battlements, watching the sun set over Ashmar, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The next week was a blur of activity. Lyra threw herself into planning the translation school with the same focus she'd used to survive the tavern. She interviewed potential students, mostly younger nobles' children who showed aptitude for languages, along with a few promising servants who could read. She designed curriculum based on how her mother had taught her, emphasizing precision and context over memorization, and she dealt with the politics. Because Kael had been right. The nobles were moving. It started subtly. Invitations to dinners that never quite materialized. Conversations that ended when she approached. Small slights designed to remind her she wasn't one of them, would never be one of them, no matter what title the king gave her. Then it escalated. Someone started a rumor that Lyra had fabricated the conspiracy, that Ronan had been innocent, and Kael had killed him based on lies. The rumor spread through the servant quarters like fire through dry grass. Claire confronted Lyra about it one evening. People are talking, saying you manipulated the king, that you're dangerous. Do you believe them? No. But I'm not the one you need to convince. Clara lowered her voice. Lord Brennan is gathering signatures. A petition to the king requesting your removal as royal translator on grounds of... She pulled out a crumpled piece of parchment. Insufficient noble birth, questionable loyalty, and potential threat to crown stability. Lyra read the document, her stomach sinking. 20 signatures already, more than a third of the noble council. What do I do? Prove them wrong, publicly, undeniably. Claire's eyes were fierce. You saved this kingdom once. Do it again. Make them see you're not a threat. You're the reason they're still free. But how? The answer came 3 days later in the form of an ambassador. The Eastern Lords sent a delegation under flag of truce, requesting formal negotiations. They wanted to discuss the voided treaties, establish new agreements, and reading between the lines, save face after their army's embarrassing retreat. The council erupted in arguments when Kael announced it. We can't negotiate with them. We have to show strength. This is a trap. Kael let them argue for exactly 1 minute. Then he said, we negotiate, but on our terms, in our fortress, with full transparency. Transparency? Brennan scoffed. These are delicate diplomatic matters, which is exactly why they'll be witnessed by the full court. Every noble, every advisor, every person with a stake in this kingdom's future will attend the negotiations, and every word will be translated publicly by our royal translator. Kael looked at Lyra. Let them see how treaties are really made. Lyra's heart hammered. You want me to translate in front of the entire court? I want you to show them what honest diplomacy looks like. No hidden clauses, no linguistic tricks, just clear, accurate translation that everyone can verify. He smiled. Think you can handle that? It was a challenge, a test, and an opportunity. Yes, she said. The negotiations took place in the Great Hall, transformed into something between a throne room and a theater. Nobles filled benches along the walls. Servants crowded the back. Even common citizens had been allowed in, packing the space until it felt like the entire kingdom was watching. The Eastern delegation sat at a long table opposite Kael and his advisors. Lord Commander Tavist was there, his ornate helm replaced by a stern face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Beside him sat 2 other Eastern lords dressed in fine robes, their expressions carefully neutral. And at a smaller table positioned between them, visible to everyone, sat Lyra. She'd never felt so exposed. Tavist opened with formal greetings in Velrathis, a calculated move designed to demonstrate their own expertise with the ancient tongue. Lyra translated aloud. Greetings to the Northern King and assembled court. We come in peace, seeking resolution and mutual benefit. Kael responded in the common tongue, which Lyra then translated into Velrathis for the Eastern delegation. Back and forth they went, proposals and counter-proposals, all of it filtered through Lyra's voice. The Eastern lords wanted new trade agreements, border access for merchants, reduced tariffs. Kael wanted guarantees of non-aggression, formal apologies for the attempted fraud, and reparations for the resources spent mobilizing against their army. The negotiations were tense but professional, and through it all, Lyra translated with painstaking accuracy, stopping frequently to explain nuances, clarify terms, and ensure both sides understood exactly what was being offered. The court watched in fascination. This was nothing like the backroom dealing they were used to. This was transparent, methodical, and, most importantly, honest. 4 hours into the negotiations, one of the Eastern lords tried to slip in a clause that would have granted them cultural exchange access to northern cities. It sounded innocent. Lyra caught it immediately. Excuse me, she said, interrupting the flow. Lord Kael, the phrase they just used, Horval Nethrin Shalmek, doesn't mean cultural exchange.
In Velrathis, it specifically means right of settlement for cultural preservation purposes. They're asking for permission to establish permanent communities in our cities. The hall erupted in whispers. The Eastern Lord who'd proposed it went pale. That's a misunderstanding of context. It's the literal translation, Lyra said calmly. If you meant something else, use different words. Kael's smile was dangerous. My translator has a point. Perhaps you'd like to rephrase. The Eastern delegation huddled in whispered conversation. Then Tavis said stiffly, "We propose standard trade delegation access. Temporary, with defined terms of stay." "Much better," Kael said. "Continue." The negotiations lasted 2 more days. 2 days of careful linguistic surgery, with Lyra excising every attempt at deception before it could take root. The Eastern Lords grew increasingly frustrated, clearly unused to dealing with someone who could match their expertise in Velrathis. But they couldn't argue with accuracy. And they couldn't accuse Lyra of bias when she translated their own words back to them with perfect fidelity. On the 3rd day, they reached an agreement. A real one. Fair terms, clear language, no hidden traps. Trade routes would open. Borders would be respected. And the Eastern Lords would formally acknowledge that the previous treaties had been invalidated due to fraud. When the final document was read aloud, in both Velrathis and the common tongue, translated by Lyra for the entire court to hear, the hall erupted in applause. The nobles who'd been plotting against her sat in stunned silence. Because Lyra had just done something they'd thought impossible. She'd negotiated a treaty that benefited the kingdom without giving away anything of substance. She'd exposed every attempted manipulation. She'd proven that knowledge and honesty were more powerful than deception. After the Eastern delegation left, Kael called another council session. This time, when Lyra entered, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Lord Brennan stood. "I owe you an apology, Miss Vexley. I doubted your abilities and your loyalty. I was wrong." Other nobles murmured agreement. Kael looked satisfied. "I believe there was a petition being circulated, requesting the royal translator's removal." Brennan had the grace to look embarrassed. "Withdrawn, Your Majesty, unanimously." "Good, because I have a new proposal." Kael stood. Lyra Vexley has proven her value to this kingdom beyond any doubt. She's earned not just a title, but a voice. I'm granting her a permanent seat on this council, full voting rights, equal authority to any lord present. The hall went silent. A commoner. On the noble council. It was unprecedented. "Your Majesty," someone ventured. The traditions nearly got us conquered," Kael said flatly. "New world, new traditions. Anyone who disagrees can challenge my decision. Formally. In single combat. I'm accepting challengers." No one moved. "Excellent. Then it's settled." Kael looked at Lyra. "Welcome to the council, Lady Vexley." "Lady." Lyra's head spun. She'd gone from invisible tavern girl to nobility in less than 2 weeks. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like she'd just painted a target on her back that would never fade. But as she looked around the council chamber, saw the mixture of respect, resentment, and calculation in the nobles' eyes, she realized something. She didn't need them to like her. She just needed them to see her. And they did. They finally, undeniably, did. The first assassination attempt came 3 weeks after Lyra joined the council. She was walking back to her chambers after a late session reviewing trade proposals when she heard the footsteps behind her. Not the measured pace of guards or the shuffle of servants. Something quicker, more purposeful. She didn't turn around, didn't run. Instead, she kept walking at the same steady pace and said, loudly enough to carry, "If you're going to kill me, at least have the courage to do it face to face." The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, young and uncertain. I wasn't," Lyra turned. A boy stood in the corridor, maybe 16, holding a knife like he wasn't quite sure what to do with it. His hands shook. "Who sent you?" Lyra asked. "No one. The boy's voice cracked. "You don't belong here. You're a servant pretending to be a lady. You're making a mockery of everything noble families stand for." "So you decided to stab me about it?" He looked at the knife in his hands like he'd just realized it was there. "I wanted to scare you, make you leave, go back to where you came from." Lyra studied him, young, privileged, probably from a minor noble house that had lost influence when Kael started promoting based on competence instead of bloodline. Not dangerous, just desperate and stupid. What's your name? She asked. Why does it matter? Why? Because I'm deciding whether to report you to the king or handle this myself. Your name might influence that decision. The boy paled. Corvin. Corvin Brennan. Of course, Lord Brennan's nephew, the old guard trying to reclaim power through intimidation. Listen to me, Corvin. Lyra stepped closer. The boy flinched but held his ground. I understand why you're angry. The world is changing, and change is frightening. But threatening me won't stop it. It'll just get you executed for treason. Is that what you want? I want things to go back to the way they were. When nobles had all the power and everyone else was invisible? When a corrupt advisor could sell out the kingdom and no one could stop him because knowledge was locked away? Lyra shook her head. That world nearly destroyed us. I'm not letting it come back. You're nobody. I'm the royal translator, a member of the king's council, and I earned that position by saving this kingdom from invasion. What have you done lately besides wave a knife at people in dark hallways? Corvin's face flushed. For a moment, Lyra thought he might actually attack. Then the knife clattered to the floor and he ran. She picked up the blade, weighed it in her hand, then continued to her chambers. She didn't report the incident, but she started carrying the knife. The second attempt was more professional. Poison in her wine at a formal dinner. Clara caught it, saw the servant who delivered it, someone new, someone who shouldn't have been working that shift. They switched the cups, and nothing happened. But the message was clear. Someone wanted her dead. Someone with resources and patience. Kale doubled her guard after that. 2 soldiers outside her door at all times. Escorts whenever she left her chambers. It felt like being imprisoned for her own protection. This can't continue, she told Kyle one evening in his study. I can't live like this. Always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if the next meal is going to kill me. Then we find whoever's behind this and end them. You think it's Brennan? I think Brennan is too smart to try something this obvious. This feels like someone trying to frame him, make me purge my own counsel while the real enemy stays hidden. Kale rubbed his face tiredly. I've been a soldier. I know how to fight enemies I can see. But this? Shadows and poison and whispers? This is harder. Welcome to politics. I hate politics. So do I, but we're stuck with them. Lyra hesitated, then said, There's another option, which is make me so valuable that killing me would be worse than letting me live. Make my knowledge, my skills, my position so integral to the kingdom that anyone who removes me damages the entire system. Kyle looked at her. You want to make yourself indispensable. I want to make knowledge indispensable. Me, specifically? I'm replaceable. But what I represent? The idea that power should come from competence and truth instead of just bloodline and violence, that's what we need to protect. By doing what? By opening the translation school to everyone. Not just nobles' children. Everyone. Servants, merchants, farmers, anyone who can read and wants to learn. Make Velrathis accessible. Make it so common that no one can ever weaponize it again. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, then he smiled. The nobles will hate that. I know. They'll fight it, argue it debases the ancient knowledge, makes it worthless. Knowledge doesn't become worthless when more people have it. It becomes powerful. You're going to start a revolution. I'm going to finish one. You started it when you took the throne. When you killed your father and broke the old system. I'm just making sure the new one actually works. Kale stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the fortress. If we do this, if we really open the school to everyone, there's no going back. The entire structure of noble privilege gets undermined. Some families will lose everything they think defines them. Good. Let them find new things to define themselves with, like actual accomplishments instead of inherited titles. He laughed. You sound like a revolutionary. I sound like someone who was invisible her whole life and finally has a voice. I'm not wasting it. Kale turned back to her. All right. Open the school, make it public, and let's see what happens when knowledge stops being a weapon the powerful hold over the weak. The announcement came at the next full council session. Kyle laid out the plan with brutal efficiency. The translation school would accept students from all backgrounds. Tuition would be subsidized by the crown. Graduates would be certified as official translators, able to work for any noble house, merchant guild, or government office. The council erupted. This is insanity, Jit. You're destroying centuries of tradition. Common people learning Velrathis? Next you'll be teaching them statecraft. Actually, Kael said calmly, That's phase 2. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Lord Brennan stood, his face carefully neutral. Your Majesty, with all respect, this will create chaos. Ancient languages require years of study, discipline, understanding of context and history. You can't just throw open the doors and expect quality translators to emerge. Why not? Lyra asked. She'd been quiet until now, letting Kyle take the lead. But this was her area. I learned Velrothis from my mother, who wasn't noble, wasn't educated by royal scholars, wasn't anything except a woman who valued knowledge. If she could teach it to a child working in a tavern, why can't we teach it to anyone else who wants to learn? Because not everyone has the capacity, because not everyone has had the opportunity, Lyra corrected. Intelligence isn't limited to noble bloodlines, Lord Brennan. Neither is dedication or aptitude. The only thing limiting who can learn is who gets the chance. And if they misuse the knowledge, use it to forge documents, create fraudulent contracts, then we prosecute them. Same as we'd prosecute a noble who did the same thing. Or did you think nobility made someone immune to fraud? Lyra's voice hardened. Ronan Vale was nobility. He had every advantage, every opportunity, every privilege, and he used all of it to betray this kingdom. So forgive me if I don't think bloodline is a guarantee of virtue. Silence. Brennan sat down, his expression unreadable. Another noble stood. The cost alone will bankrupt the treasury. Actually, Kale said, we've run the numbers. The school will cost less than maintaining one military fortress, and the return on investment, having reliable translators who can prevent another fraudulent treaty situation, far exceeds the expense. You've already decided this, someone accused. Yes. This isn't a debate. It's an announcement. Kale's voice was iron. The school opens in 3 months. Lady Vexley will oversee curriculum and admissions. Any noble house that wants to contribute resources or sponsor students is welcome to do so. Any house that tries to sabotage it will be considered enemies of the crown. Are we clear? No one argued, but Lyra could see the resentment in their eyes. The fear. Because this wasn't just about a school. It was about power shifting away from them and toward a broader population they couldn't control. They'd fight back. Somehow. Eventually. She just had to be ready when they did. The attack came during the school's opening ceremony. 3 months of preparation, 3 months of interviewing students and developing lesson plans and fighting off subtle attempts at sabotage. 3 months of Lyra barely sleeping, constantly watching for the next assassination attempt, the next political maneuver. But they'd made it. The school was ready. 20 students, half from noble families, half from common backgrounds, stood in the newly constructed building on the fortress grounds, ready to begin learning Velrothis. The ceremony was simple. Kyle would say a few words. Lyra would welcome the students. Then lessons would begin. They never got that far. Halfway through Kyle's speech, a commotion erupted at the back of the crowd. Shouts, the clash of steel. Armed men burst through the gathered crowd, not soldiers but mercenaries in mismatched armor. 20 of them, maybe more, moving with the coordination of professionals. They weren't targeting Kyle. They were targeting the school building. Fire! Someone shouted. The mercenaries hurled torches through the windows. Flames caught immediately. They doused the interior with oil beforehand. Within seconds, the building was engulfing in fire. The students screamed, scrambling away from the heat. Kyle's guards rushed forward, engaging the mercenaries. Steel rang against steel. People fled in panic. Lyra stood frozen, watching years of work, months of preparation, burn. Then she saw the books, the carefully copied texts, the Velrothis grammars and dictionaries, the translations and lesson plans, all of them inside the building, all of them burning. She ran. Lyra, no! Clara's voice distant and desperate. But Lyra was already moving, pushing through smoke and heat toward the entrance. The doorway was a wall of fire, but she could see past it to the main classroom where the books were stored on shelves. Someone grabbed her arm, yanked her back. Kyle. His face was smoke-stained and furious. Are you insane? The books, all our work, can be rewritten. You can't. He pulled her away from the building as part of the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Let it burn. We'll rebuild. We can't. Those were the only copies. Lyra's voice broke. Everything my mother taught me, every translation I made, all the evidence from the Ronan investigation. It's all in there. Kale's expression shifted. Evidence? I kept copies, documentation.
Everything that proved how the betrayal happened. I was going to use it for teaching, to show students how language could be twisted. And now it's gone. Kael's jaw tightened. Convenient. They watched the building burn, surrounded by chaos. The guards had subdued most of the mercenaries, but a few had escaped into the fortress. People shouted for water, for healers, for order. And Lyra stood there, feeling like she'd lost everything again. Then she heard it. Someone speaking. The words distant but clear. Velrathis. She turned, scanning the crowd. There. One of the students, a girl maybe 14, reciting from memory. The opening passage of the Code of Ancient Kings. The first lesson Lyra had planned to teach. Another student joined in. Then another. They were reciting the lessons Lyra had taught them during preliminary sessions. Word for word, perfect pronunciation. Tears burned Lyra's eyes. The books could burn. The building could fall. But the knowledge, the actual living knowledge, existed in the minds of the students. It couldn't be destroyed by fire. They remember, she whispered. Kael heard her. Understood. His hand found hers and squeezed. The fire burned through the night. By dawn, nothing remained of the school building except charred beams and smoking rubble. But in the fortress courtyard, as the sun rose over Ashmar, Lyra stood before the 20 students and continued their first lesson. No building, no books, no formal structure. Just her voice and their minds and the ancient language that had survived empires falling. By midday, word had spread. Citizens gathered to watch. Nobles emerged from the fortress to see what was happening. Lyra taught for 6 hours straight, her voice hoarse, her body exhausted. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop, because this was the revolution. Not the building, not the official ceremony. This, knowledge being passed openly, freely, to anyone willing to learn, this was what would change everything. When she finally paused, throat too raw to continue, one of the students stood. I can teach the next section, the girl, her name was Mira, said. I have it memorized. Another student volunteered to teach grammar, another to lead pronunciation practice. The lesson continued without Lyra. She stepped back, watching them take ownership of their own education, and realized something profound. She wasn't necessary anymore. The school would exist with or without her. The knowledge would spread because the students would teach others who would teach others until the language was truly part of the kingdom's fabric again. That's when Kael made his announcement. He strode into the courtyard, still in smoke-stained armor, and climbed onto a platform where everyone could see him. Last night, he called, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, someone tried to destroy our future. They burned the school, thinking that would end this experiment. They were wrong. The crowd murmured. Knowledge doesn't live in buildings. It lives in people. And the people of this kingdom have proven they're ready for it, willing to fight for it, determined to preserve it. Kael's eyes found Lyra. Our royal translator has shown us that power comes from understanding, from truth, from the courage to speak even when it's dangerous. And I have decided that such courage deserves to be recognized. He gestured for Lyra to join him on the platform. She climbed up, heart hammering with no idea what was coming. Kael reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Lyra saw a ring, not ornate, but solid and well-made, bearing the royal seal. The council has demanded I take a queen, Kael said. They've paraded eligible noblewomen before me for months, each one chosen for political advantage, family connections, strategic alliances, each one representing the old way of doing things. He held out the ring. I'm choosing a different way. Lyra Vexley, you've proven yourself in every way that matters. You've saved this kingdom with nothing but intelligence and courage. You've rebuilt systems that were broken. You've given voice to people who had none. And you've done it all while facing enemies who wanted you silenced. His voice softened. I'm not asking you to be a political pawn. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, to help me build a kingdom where merit matters more than bloodline and truth matters more than tradition. The courtyard was silent. Lyra stared at the ring, her mind blank with shock. A week ago, she'd been worried about assassins. Now the king was proposing marriage. Her voice cracked. Kael, I'm a tavern girl. I can't. You're the royal translator, a member of my council, the woman who prevented a war and is rebuilding our educational system from the ground up. You're exactly what this kingdom needs.
He smiled slightly. The question is whether you want it. Lyra looked out at the crowd, saw nobles who hated her, commoners who saw her as hope, students who trusted her to teach them. Saw Clara beaming with tears in her eyes, saw the rubble of the school that would be rebuilt. She thought about the invisible girl she'd been, the silent servant who'd survived by not mattering, and she realized she'd never been that girl. Not really. She'd always had a voice. She'd just never had the chance to use it. "I want it," she said. Kael slipped the ring onto her finger. The crowd erupted, half in celebration, half in outrage, but the celebration was louder. And when Kael kissed her, sealing the engagement in front of the entire kingdom, Lyra felt something shift, not just in her life, but in the world around her. The old order was crumbling. The new one was being built on foundations of knowledge and merit and truth. It wouldn't be smooth. There would be more fights, more opposition, more attempts to drag everything back to the way it used to be. But standing beside Kael, watching the students continue their lesson in the ruins of the school, Lyra knew they'd win, because you couldn't burn down an idea whose time had come. The wedding took place 3 months later, in the Great Hall of Draven's Keep. Lyra wore a dress that was beautiful but practical, designed more for movement than display. Her mother's silver pendant hung at her throat, the only jewelry she wore besides the engagement ring. The ceremony was conducted in both the common tongue and Velrathis, translated by Mira and 3 other students who'd progressed far enough to handle the formal language. Lyra had insisted on that, making the wedding a demonstration that knowledge was no longer locked away, that anyone could access the ancient words if they put in the work. When it came time for vows, Kael spoke first. "I swear to honor you as my equal, to trust your wisdom, and to build a kingdom worthy of your courage." Simple, direct, very Kael. Lyra took a breath. "I swear to speak truth even when it's hard, to use knowledge for good, and to never let power make me forget what it's like to be invisible." The hall was packed. Nobles in fine clothes, common citizens allowed in for the occasion, foreign dignitaries from kingdoms curious about the Northern Realm's unusual choice of queen. When the ceremony concluded, when Lyra officially became Queen of the Northern Reach, she felt the weight of it settle over her like a cloak. But it wasn't crushing. It was purpose. The celebration lasted 3 days, and on the 4th day, Queen Lyra Vexley returned to the rebuilt school, bigger now, with space for 100 students, and taught her first lesson. Because being queen didn't mean abandoning what made her valuable in the first place. Years later, when historians would write about the transformation of the Northern Reach, they'd point to this moment as the turning point. When a kingdom that had ruled through violence and tradition began ruling through knowledge and merit. They'd call it the Velrian Revolution, named after the ancient language that sparked it. But Lyra always thought of it differently. It wasn't a revolution. It was just what happened when you gave people who'd been invisible a chance to be seen. When you armed them with knowledge instead of swords. When you built power on truth instead of deception. The school grew. Within 5 years, there were branches in every major city. Within 10, every child in the kingdom learned basic Velrathis alongside the common tongue. Treaties became transparent. Contracts became clear. The kind of conspiracy Ronan had orchestrated became impossible because too many people could read the language to hide traps in it. Other kingdoms noticed. Some adopted similar systems. Others clung to the old ways and slowly collapsed under the weight of their own corruption. The Northern Reach thrived, and at the center of it all was a woman who'd started as a forgotten servant and ended as a queen who'd reshaped the world. Lyra never forgot where she came from. She kept the old book her mother had given her in her chambers, its pages more fragile with each passing year. Sometimes she'd read from it, remembering the lessons learned in secret, the fear of being discovered, the weight of carrying dangerous knowledge alone. But she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Kael stood beside her as partner and equal, ruling with the same direct honesty that had drawn them together. They argued frequently about policy, about priorities, about the pace of reform, but they never lied to each other. Truth had saved them. They wouldn't abandon it now. On her 10th anniversary as queen, Lyra stood before the newest class of translation students and told them her story, about being invisible, about correcting a king, about discovering conspiracy and surviving assassination attempts and learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. "You all come from different places," she told them. "Noble families and common homes, cities and farms, rich backgrounds and poor ones. But here, in this school, none of that matters. What matters is whether you're willing to learn, whether you're willing to use knowledge responsibly, whether you're willing to speak truth even when it's dangerous. She looked around the room, seeing herself reflected in their faces. Young people hungry for opportunity, desperate to matter, ready to prove themselves. The world will try to make you small, she said. It will tell you that people like us don't belong in places of power, that we should stay invisible, stay silent, know our place. Don't believe it. You belong anywhere your knowledge and courage can take you. And if someone tries to stop you, correct them. The students laughed, recognizing the reference to her first meeting with Kael. Learn, Lyra continued. Grow. Use what you learn to make the world better. And never forget, knowledge is power, but only if you have the courage to use it. She dismissed the class and walked through the fortress to the battlements where she'd stood so many times before. The city sprawled below, prosperous and growing. In the distance, she could see the border where the Eastern Army had once threatened invasion, peaceful now, secured by honest treaties instead of fraudulent ones. Clara joined her, older now but still sharp-eyed and quick-witted. She'd risen to become the fortress's head administrator, managing everything Lyra and Kael were too busy to handle. Thinking about the old days, Clara asked, wondering if I ever really was that girl in the tavern. It feels like a different life. It was a different life. You built a new one. Clara smiled. And you dragged the rest of us into it, whether we were ready or not. Regret it? Not even a little. Clara looked out over the city. My daughter starts at the school next year. She's going to learn the language that used to be forbidden. She's going to have opportunities I never dreamed of. That's because of you. That's because of everyone who was willing to try something different, led by you. Clara squeezed her shoulder. Don't diminish what you did. You changed the world. Own it. Lyra stood there as the sun set over Ashmar, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and thought about the journey from invisible servant to visible queen. It hadn't been smooth, hadn't been easy. There had been moments when death felt closer than survival, when giving up seemed smarter than fighting on. But she'd spoken anyway. Had corrected a king in a language no one thought she knew, had exposed conspiracy and survived betrayal and rebuilt a system from smoking ruins. And in doing so, she'd proven that power didn't require violence or noble blood or ancient privilege. Sometimes it just required the courage to speak truth when everyone else stayed silent. She touched the ring on her finger, symbol of position and partnership and a promise to never stop fighting for the kingdom she'd helped reshape. Behind her, Kael emerged from the fortress, drawn by the same sunset that had captured her attention. He joined her at the wall, slipping his hand into hers. Good day? He asked. Taught a class. Reviewed treaty proposals. Prevented a minor diplomatic incident. Standard royal business. She smiled. You? Council meeting. Military exercises. Signed off on the new school expansion plans. He paused. Also received a letter from the Eastern Lords. They want to send students here to study Velrathi's properly. Apparently their own translations have been questionable, and they'd rather learn from the source than repeat our mistakes. Lyra laughed. We're becoming educators to the world. We're proving there's a better way. Some kingdoms are learning, others will eventually. Kael looked at her. You did this. All of it. We did this. No. I killed my father and took a throne. That's conquest. You transformed what the throne meant. That's revolution. His grip tightened on her hand. And I'm grateful every day that you had the audacity to correct me in that tavern. Best stupid decision I ever made. Mine too. They stood together as darkness fell over the kingdom, watching lights bloom in windows across the city. Each light a home. Each home a family. Each family benefiting from a system built on knowledge instead of oppression. From invisible girl to visible queen. From silent servant to voice of transformation. From weakness to strength, not through violence, but through the simple, revolutionary act of speaking truth. Lyra had survived the harsh world that tried to erase her, and then she'd transformed it. That was her legacy. Not a crown or a title or a place in history books, but a world where other invisible people finally had the chance to be seen, where knowledge was power available to all, where courage could reshape kingdoms. And standing on those battlements, hand in hand with the king who'd become her partner, Lyra knew with absolute certainty that she'd never be invisible again. Not because of the crown, but because she'd finally learned to speak, and once you find your voice, no one can take it away. The story of the invisible girl who heard too much had become the story of the queen who changed everything. And it was only just beginning.